Right. Okay. Well, look, David, I think, first of all, thank you for agreeing to do this, and welcome back. I mean, obviously, you did one
My pleasure.
few years ago on the trip to Mexico City, and that was extremely interesting and a pretty long afternoon. So I don't know if there is anybody. I don't think there's anybody on our call here that doesn't know who you are. But because we record it and we post all of our talks to our YouTube channel, if you could perhaps give just a wee introduction and explain how you got into this,
of course,
just to set the scene, and then if we can spend. Look, we've set aside 60 to 90 minutes for the presentation, but you take however long you need, and if we want to ask questions on the way through, we'll just see how it goes. But at some point, it has to be a convenient break, comfort break, and
sure,
for us to recharge our glasses and so forth.
No doubt, no doubt. I do find though that subjects that elicit questions are best asked and answered at the time.
Yes, yeah. So we'll just be pragmatic. See how it goes.
Yes.
And, I know sometimes there are people that have real audio or mic problems. I mean, David Percox is on the call. So Tony, you just look after the chat, and we'll see how it goes. All right, floor is yours, David.
Well, again, thank you very much for the invitation to present some of the thoughts and research that I've been through. My name is David Josephs. I've been writing and researching about JFK for close to 30 years now, 25, 30 years. I originally got interested when I came across a handful of Life and Look magazines in the closets of my parents when all the photos were there. And I remember sitting on the floor and being completely mesmerized by all the things that were presented about this case. But I really didn't jump on it at that point. Years went by, college, things go by, and I found myself working in a spot that gave me a lot of time to do more research into what I was interested in. So that was about 22 years ago, I guess then. I started to get onto the forums, listen to what people were saying, find out what they were saying, and try to, I remember the very first thing was thinking, boy, it sure does look like Kennedy and Connally are hit at the same time in that film. If that's the case, then we have problems. And I remember diving into the Zapruder film and learning many, many, many things that I had never known to that point. And that was the jumping off point to buying Best Evidence and reading that and being even more amazed and enthralled, and really kind of coming to the realization that no matter what we're given in evidence, it's simply not going to illuminate what happened. It's just simply going to show either the bones and or the shadows of the conspiracy that was concocted to make Oswald guilty and whoever did it not. So part of that now brings me, I've written, as Neil mentioned, I did do quite a lot of deep depth research into Mexico City, the trip that made a lot of people very, very amazed and surprised. But the reality that I was able to find after a couple of years of the research was that it made way more sense that Oswald did not go, and the evidence that placed him there was generated as part of a process not necessarily related to the assassination, but secondarily to so. Almost everything they made Oswald do, not necessarily Mexico, but almost everything, had that dual purpose of giving him the bona fides for being an infiltrator into these little groups and having some kind of bona fide, or if need be, use it against him as evidence in whatever they wanted to convict him for. So we now move forward, jumping over a couple of things. And one of the biggest questions has been, how did Ruby get down into the basement at such a perfect time so that as Oswald is brought out, he's there within minutes and split seconds to be able to do what he did? And let's go through and see what finds. Now, in my opinion, the way Ruby says it and the way evidence is offered, you can almost immediately ask yourself what the opposite means in virtually every case in this JFK world. So with Ruby saying that someone in the police department is guilty of giving the information as to Oswald, when Oswald was coming down, that still would not have been able to be conveyed to Ruby in any meaningful time. So a plan had to be much more in place, in our opinion, that included how did they get Oswald to Ruby, knowing that Ruby was coming. And that's the approach we would. Now I'm going to go back in time a little bit and give you a little history of some of the things and some of the reasons why we feel the way we do. This is a schematic of the City Hall building, the one on the corner, Harwood. This is facing west. So this face of the building you would not see today. This is the one that's butt up against the courthouse annex. But to give you some idea, there was a sub-basement area. There was a regular basement area for which there was a commerce ramp on one side and quite a few things under the sidewalk and under the building on the north side there, or the south side, sorry. And on the north side, they had yet to build a Main Street ramp, which was obviously added later when they built the annex building for the courthouse. Some of the things that do get overlooked because very few people can see this view of the building is that at the left, the circled window in what does he say here? Whoop. Did I lose you?
No, we can hear you.
There we go. Okay, sorry. In 1856, not 1856, 1956, that window was actually a door that matched other doors. Another door was on the second floor landing of the stairs that passed through the Dallas Police Department and City Hall and directly into the annex building without having to go down and around and up. These were these were things that were mentioned in testimony, but not overly looked into when Ruby and his travels were looked into, because they didn't consider anything else other than what they were told Ruby did. Again, 1914, when they built City Hall, they called it the municipal building. When they built an annex building in 1956, they put the words municipal building on top of it. So for many years, it confused people. And when they spoke in 1963 about who and where and what, some of those building names gets mixed up. They get mixed up in some of the testimony, and this alley that they're talking about, which is not really an alley, also gets kind of conflated into not being what it is. And I'll show you what that alley is in a second. See if I can, how do I get a full screen on this? Huh, all right, well, either way. Now, this is the basement of two separate buildings. This is a commission exhibit, 2179. And again, I don't know that they were overtly trying to hide something, but they do make this appear as if without the City Hall designation and the Red Arrow Annex building designation, that you're under one building. When that's simply not the truth. The only thing that leads down to that building, other than the hall and a couple of stairways, is the jail elevator coming from Fritz's office. Have you seen this schematic?
Yes.
Okay, so you're aware. What I want to do and blow up a little, because it is somewhat small, is the area right there where it says stairs up, elevators, and service elevator. That's the area we're going to be concentrating on. Now, when they built, here is the building on the left, the City Hall in blue. The ramp was built to Main Street at about the same time that they built the municipal courthouse. We have the ramp on Commerce side. We have, which we'll get to shortly, third floor offices of the Dallas Police Department hierarchy. The parking lot next to the annex. All of this across the top is Main Street with Pearl on the right and Harvard on the left, Commerce on the bottom, and Western Union up near the corner of Main and Pearl. This is what it looks like facing east, southeast. Again, so here's the annex building. Oh, that's a little smaller. Here's the annex building, but up right against City Hall from 1914. And really the only pass-through areas are from the third floor of the City Hall down to the second floor of the annex building. And those pass-throughs included the one on the stairway I spoke of, and one near the senior management, senior officers of the Dallas Police Department, the wing that carried Chief Curry, his assistants, and lo and behold, Captain Westbrook. Now, this is Pearl Street. Western Union is around the corner to the right, one building in. And one has to ask themselves, Jack Ruby looking to do what he was doing or whatever he was trying to do. The idea was to not be seen, I think, to just stroll down Main Street and then down a ramp with policemen where the odds of meeting someone that they knew, he knew or knew him, were probably about 60%. Turns out Vaughn was very much aware of who Jack Ruby was. So we considered that one of the smarter ways of going, and what ultimately came to be referred to as the alley method or the alley entrance down by the House Select Committee's conclusions, is this route. He would come around the back way where there would be very, very few people who would recognize him. Again, this is a Sunday, and straight down that little driveway, which leads directly to the door on the side of the annex building. Now, before he gets to do this, we do need to understand that Jack Ruby and the Dallas Police Department were pretty well acquainted, especially the higher ups. Captain Fritz was a patron of the Carousel Club. Detectives were friends of Ruby up and down the different divisions and the different areas of the Dallas Police. Lieutenant James Gilmore, he also frequented the Carousel Club. The Chief of Police Curry was a close acquaintance of Jack Ruby. Lieutenant C. Arnett, who oversaw the reserve officers, was also a close friend. Theodore Fleming told the FBI there was a good likelihood that any officer acquainted with Ruby would have allowed him into the building if Ruby had requested to do so. So the idea that this was a possibility of the way he came in kind of became the immediate focus of what they were going to look into and try to prove about what happened. More importantly is Captain Fritz, which as time went, John Armstrong and I got more and more suspicious and worried, and evidence that Fritz and his history and his status quo and control of the circumstances was a very large factor in how a lot of the evidence got subverted and how a lot of the accesses and ultimately murder of Oswald was accomplished. And he had a couple of friends who will get into those, I believe, in a minute. So if you look back into Will Fritz's history, he was known as running a one-man show and remembering minute details of interrogations, yet he would not only not share them with anyone, he wouldn't write them down. So it was his standard operational procedure that by the time it got to court, it was a done deal. His conviction rate was 98%. He did not like to lose. And whether the evidence needed to be created, provided, or just simply lost. He got the job done. He was also in charge of the press access. Now, what bothers us, or bothers me, is that right across from his office was a recording room specific with tape recording, stenographers, and there must have been a dozen reporters, all with notes, pencils, and the ability to take down notes. No tape recorder was available. So here's one of the largest homicide divisions or departments in the United States at the time, and they might as well have been chiseling on tablets. I mean, it just made very little sense for the kind, it made very little sense from the outside, but from those inside, they continued to support the fact that Fritz was not real big on notes and more on memory. Yet, many of the people in the room who wrote reports on the interrogation do claim that Fritz was jotting down notes. We saw those notes later on down the road. And what's strange about those notes, as you will probably find also strange about any of the interrogations, nothing is asked about Tippit, not a single question. Now, later in his testimony, Fritz will say that he did ask, and Oswald said he didn't do it, but there's no proof for that. It is kind of strange, though, that at the time he's being interviewed these first few times, Kennedy's the accusation in charge of Kennedy had not come up yet, and he was really arrested for the murder of Tippit. When you have the opportunity to look at Fritz's notes or any of the other notes and reports for the interrogations, you'll find it extremely strange and bizarre that Tippit and trying to solve that murder was completely disregarded from the very first second. Now, the key pieces of identification attribute to Ollitt's wallet, which is what really begins the process of the patsy associating the man with the rifle with the shooting, are these two pieces of identification. And despite neither the Tippit scene wallet found by Croy or the arrest wallet pulled from Oswald's pocket, being in evidence, they still have these two cards. We will get into how and where those cards came from and down the road why the wallets wind up being important. But this kind of sets up the person who finds the wallet at the Tippit scene is Croy, who gives it to Westbrook. Croy and Westbrook, Croy and Westbrook, Croy and Westbrook. You'll hear that a lot. And ultimately, our thoughts is that if the Tippit wallet gets to Fritz, and Fritz opens a wallet with Heidel and Oswald identification and very little else in it, at the same time, other wallets are found on his body and other wallets are found in other places in his life, something's rotten and he needs to either protect or expose. Fritz is very much into the protect, not expose angle of things. So let's look at what Ruby was doing to stalk Oswald while we're getting ready to figure out how he got down there. At 7 p.m. on the night of the assassination of Kennedy, Ruby tries to enter Fritz's office where he's being questioned. The big question there is, how did he know Oswald was in that office? Some kind of communication between Ruby and people in the Dallas Police Department, his friends, had to have been going on. 10:30, a couple hours later, Ruby buys and brings sandwiches to City Hall. He does this a lot. He ingratiates himself to a lot of the police department. He gives away a lot of freebies to his carousel room. They took care of him. He took care of them. About 45 minutes later, he corrects Wade during a press conference that it's not the Free Cuba Committee, but the Fair Play for Cuba. On a side note, Ruby is supposedly tells the FBI that his loaded .38 was in his pocket at that time, that he was in process and already thinking about how to kill Oswald. The next morning, or the next day, on Saturday, 1:30, he parks at the all right parking. He calls his friends at KILF, and he tells the lot manager, Mr. Brown, that two men would come to the garage, ask for Ruby, which they did, and for Brown to relay a message. The problem being is that the men who showed and the message that was provided is unknown. All we know are the top line details of that relationship to the all right parking lot. At 3 p.m., he calls KILF again, and I understand they will be moving Oswald. This is 3 p.m. on November the 23rd, Saturday. I find it hard to believe that anyone at this point still had any idea of them moving Oswald later that night or the following day. There's very little indication that that was the case, that they were still talking about it. But for some reason, somehow information gets to Ruby, specifically about them moving Oswald. Okay, 4 p.m. now, he speaks with both television WBAP engineer and cameraman, and he claims to know Wade and says that he, can find information for them if they need anything from him, trying to ingratiate himself to these people to maybe get some information about it. Also turns out during that day that Ruby and Officer Billy Grammer, who will come back around shortly, had a talk for about an hour. Now the following day, right after midnight, between 2:15 and 3 a.m., calls are being made to the Sheriff's Department, Dallas Police Department, FBI, and they're speaking of killing Oswald during the transfer. The man who answers the call at the Dallas Police Department was Billy Grammer. Billy Grammer's affidavit is given personally to Curry, stating that it was Ruby on the call, yet this affidavit disappears and Grammer is never called to testify. Grammer says that the caller knew detailed plans of the transfer, which would only be available to the Dallas police and the FBI. Now, again, within the group of people who are talking about the plans of transfer, the highest level people are Fritz and Curry. If I had to make a choice, Fritz, and somehow messages through Fritz, maybe through Westbrook, get to him, but I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, we don't have anything that could help us out. 4 a.m. in the morning, he gets back home. Ruby arrives home and now starts his fateful day. At 8 a.m., 4 hours later, WBAP crewman Richie identifies Ruby standing in front of City Hall. Most people aren't aware of this. Also at 8 a.m., especially not aware of this, is that Ruby's maid, Miss Pitts, does what she always does, calls to confirm that she's going to be cleaning, and she cannot believe she's talking to Ruby. Doesn't make sense, considering Ruby is identified as being downtown by City Hall. It's fairly unlikely that the person she's talking to was Ruby. And the only other person to be in Ruby's apartment that morning was Senator. Turns out at 9:30, a Texas preacher speaks with Ruby in the City Hall elevator going up. At 10 a.m., Richie sees Ruby again out front of the City Hall. At 10:19, records show that this is the time Karen Carlin calls Ruby long distance with her sob story. Prior to 10:20, Grammer telling Curry about Ruby's calls the night before is not conveyed to anyone by Curry, yet kind of a way of proving that he did somehow talk to them and saw maybe the affidavit Grammer put together. Curry suggests to his assistants that Oswald be transported in an armored car, and both men agree. Bottom line there is that Ruby could not have been at his apartment to receive a call from Karen Carlin or know that at all. It does get deeper in terms of who saw who. The people that did see someone claiming to be Ruby do not confirm that it was Ruby at his apartment. So it just seemed like a very different, gruff man that had nothing to do with who Ruby was. So the The people who are asked do not confirm it's Ruby. Could it have been? Yeah, maybe, very possible. But there is secondary and tertiary support that he was in and around City Hall within an hour of when all of this was going to happen, not just happenstance that he had to be there. Now, the thing about that is if he's that around there that early and running to these different places, the argument related to Sheba in the car becomes less and less important because he's obviously leaving this dog, if it was there, the entire time. So we'll get into that a little bit later because that is a big question as to whether or not this made sense to some people. But I have some thoughts on that as well. Bottom line, Karen Carlin was not Ruby's alibi. Ruby was already there. At 10:20, Curry tells the press, Oswald will be transferred to the county jail by armored truck. At 10:30, Ruby now once again asks the cameraman of WBAP whether he has been brought down yet. He's waiting. If we remember, the original plans was to bring Oswald down at 10 a.m. That's what Curry told the press, and that's what would have happened, except Ruby wasn't there yet. Ruby wasn't coming yet. Nobody had said anything to Fritz yet. So at 10 o'clock, between 10 and the time they took him down, Harry Holmes, who had left his church and his wife, came to Fritz's office to ask these questions and delay the time past 10 o'clock for what wound up being almost an hour. Now, if this is happening upstairs, downstairs in the basement, Captain Talbert is in charge of security. He has very specific orders. He wants all unauthorized people removed from the basement, which is done. At 9 a.m., the basement is cleared except for Dallas Police Department personnel and Sergeant Patrick Dean, which you will remember his name, and 14 others. They search the basement, search all over, sub-basements, corners, cracks, crevices, you name it. They give that wonderful Dallas Police Department search like they did in the Texas School Book Depository and claim to have found nothing. Officers Jez and Taylor are put at the top of the Commerce ramp. Officer Vaughn is at the top of the Main Street ramp. And they are told that no one but identified newsmen are allowed down these ramps. Reserve officers are stationed in and around, and the Dallas Police Department assigns traffic police, detectives, and other reserve officers all along the route to the county jail as protection. There are 5 means of entry to get into the basement. You have the door from the sub-basement, which used to house a shooting range when it was first built, many in the early 1900s. There are numbers 2 and 3, the passenger elevators. There's a service elevator, of which there's a back door to, which you can enter. And there's a stairs, number 5, the door 5 to first floor annex. Both sides of these stairs has a fire door, so that you can open it. I mean, while they may be locked, they are easily opened. They don't remain locked. I realize you can't read, that's okay. But what I will blow this up just to give you an area of where we're looking. On the left is a photograph of the ramp that I identify on the right. And you can see the names Brock and Worsley right here. And they basically draw a line from Worsley to Brock to the service elevator. There are no other policemen in the entirety of the downstairs basement parking lot. Okay. Vaughn, as you can see, is up at the top on the left. There's supposedly 2 reserve officers at the bottom of the main ramp. And our man Nelson enters from City Hall, which yet has another entrance besides the jail cell elevator, or the holding cell elevator. Any questions, any concerns at this point? Everything good?
I've got loads of questions, but I don't know whether to save them until the end.
Well, we can definitely take it. Let me see if there's a natural break in here. Okay, I'll tell you what, because what we go into next is how the security of the basement basically was stripped, not 15 minutes to 25 minutes before Oswald is being brought down. So why don't we stop here for a second and give me an idea what's on your mind?
Well, you touched on one of them, which is really, what did you make of all the cash and Sheba being in the car? I mean, because, you know, the narrative is that, you know, he did this on a whim.
Yes.
And you know, this wasn't as pre-planned as you're suggesting. And, you know, that they found all this cash, which he wouldn't obviously want to be found potentially. So what do you make of this? You sort of touched on the fact that you have an explanation for this.
Well, there has been a number. The most difficult for people analyzing this to comprehend is the amount of time it takes for Ruby to make any mention of checking up on his dog, on anything. Now, yes, we knew where the car was. Yes, they went over to open up the trunk and they found the cash, and they opened up the door and supposedly found a dog. Whether it was Sheba or not, they're not sure, because it took another 4 or 5 days before Sheba, or the dog that they were picking up, was taken from the pound. So what gets me is your roommate, George Senator, who's available there and can help you, is not doing anything to get the dog, not doing anything to secure this precious animal for Ruby. His activities and his actions after shooting and moving on had very little to do with concern over these animals. And the suggestion is that it may not have been Sheba and just simply another dog to add to the alibi of his impromptu-ness of the call. Considering he wasn't there to get the call at his house, and he had been down in the downtown area between 8 and 11 o'clock, that entire time he's with the dog, and then he decides to just leave it in the car for a few hours. I don't know that it sounds to me more like an alibi than a real concern. And now I'm going to throw in a real kind of left-sided, off the tangent thought that I read from John Dolva the other day, in that Ruby was known to sell drugs as well, and to take drugs. Turns out that, and I didn't know this, but Sheba is another word for heroin.
Oh.
As is Red Dog, another word for heroin. So whether Sheba in the car was a dog or a bag of heroin, I don't know. All I know is everything I have read has made his children, these dogs, not very important in the first week, not even the first couple of hours, the first week. So, I mean, do you leave your lovely dog in your car unlocked? Maybe not. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know that leaving the car and his supposed strong feelings are, one, to be believed, if you can believe anything Ruby has to say, or pans out overall when you look at the activities of who went over and got the car, and he just kind of stumbled on this dog, and they brought the dog to the to the animal shelter, and it just really wasn't a big deal. So I hope that addresses some of it.
Do we have any transcripts of Ruby's interviews? or anyone who's taken notes, a la the notes for Oswald's interviews? Has anyone done a deep dive into, you know, what he said in the immediate hours? I mean, he was taken immediately upstairs, of course. Do we have any?
You know, they show some of his press conference stuff, and we will get into some of the initial things that he's supposed to say and who he says them to, and why we don't feel, and why the Warren Commission lawyer, Griffin, didn't believe him. So that's kind of where we'll go next, okay?
Okay.
Anything else?
Just around this kind of area.
Yeah, sure.
The all right parking facility. Is this the same place where he sat with Harry Olsen and Kathy Kay? Was it that car park?
Yeah, literally across the street. Yes.
Really?
I believe it's also the car park that Oswald put an application in for.
Yeah, because that was my supplementary question, because he was trying to find work at this place. So
Yes.
Is there anything about this car park that you think is critical here? You mentioned the two men and the phone calls that he made.
I don't know. There's not enough evidence that I have been able to find yet that suggests what was going on with the owner and the people involved there. So I would have to do a bit more looking. We do know that the car was there, that it was across the street from the Wells, from the Western Union, and that it had been there for a while.
Okay, no, that's interesting. What a coincidence again.
Now, let's talk about what happens at 11:15 that morning. Again, Oswald was supposed to be brought down at 10 a.m. That's not happening. Orders are being given to search the place, which was before 9. Now 10 o'clock comes and passes, and a new set of orders starts coming down between 10:30 and 10:45. Let me go back up one. There's only these two people, Brock and Worsley, are the only two people between what we believe the side annex door and where Ruby ultimately stood. These are the only two people that could stop him, that could see him and be aware of him and stop him. At 10:45, Brock, the man who was in charge of the 3 elevators, was reassigned to traffic duty and left his post. At 11 a.m., not 15 minutes before they bring him down, or 18 minutes before they bring him down, Reserve Police Officer Worsley is sent out of the parking lot. And to replace these two men, Sergeant Dean places an unidentified reserve officer. The unidentified reserve officer will remain, in Dean's testimony and statements, unidentified, no matter how hard they try. It is our impression that this unidentified reserve officer is Kenneth Croy. Within 15 minutes now of 11 o'clock, 11:05, a reserve officer is now seen next to Ruby, right there in the right corner of that photograph. Ruby is in the hat. You can see the brim, and Croy is in the white police cap. Croy's role that morning was that of a guard in the basement and to be by the jail office. So in essence, a reserve officer put in as a guard in the basement, the only place that a reserve officer was placed to replace, to relieve other officers, was Brock, which would have been the door Ruby would have walked out of, virtually right next to Croy. So here comes Oswald. We have 40 to 50 newsmen, 20 of whom are now by the Main Street ramp, and we have all these policemen. But of all these people, of all 125 people, not a single person in the reports prior or after said that they saw Ruby coming down the Main Street ramp. Not a single person. So let's go to the official story. The official story is, as we reiterated, Ruby gets a call from Karen Carlin needing money. Ruby goes to Western Union after 10 o'clock, 10:30, closer to 11, sends them the money order at 11:18, walks down Main Street, turns left down the Main Street ramp, walking past Vaughn, as well as three policemen in a car that was assigned to go drive out and lead the armor car. We'll get into that car shortly. Ruby is waiting but a few minutes at most before Oswald is brought to him. And this is where we can now start to see Croy. Not only is he standing next to Ruby, but in his own testimony, he reports seeing Ruby within a few minutes of Oswald's arrival, knowing full well that Ruby is not a newsman and should not be down there. Croy and they're just aware of each other. The statement at the top right from the HSCA is that this officer gave description of a man he believes to have been Jack Ruby that was at foot of Main Street ramp a while before the shooting. Wait a minute, how did that get there? Okay, I guess we'll have to come back to Croy. Maybe I messed up my order. Who knows? So let's see where we are here. So Fritz, that's why the transition. Ruby is waiting a few minutes. Croy is seen with him, and Fritz leads the way, bringing Oswald down to his assassination, getting out of the way as quickly as possibly can. His man Lavelle later on writes recaps of everybody and what they saw and who they could use. This actually exists. And Lavelle writes that Captain Fritz can testify to the summary and saw the shooting from a few feet away. Now, we all know and have seen what Fritz was doing at the time Oswald was getting shot. Would you call on the man in the hat with the arrow to tell us what happened? Would you listen to a word he had to say about what happened? And where's Dean? Dean is up by the armored car. So like Fritz, no one saw anyone coming down the ramp. Putnam, Sergeant Putnam, is the man who assigned Vaughn to guard Main Street and get information from anyone coming down. Vaughn had known Ruby since 1959 and insisted that Ruby did not go down the Main Street ramp. Other officers at 11:18, and you can see this on the videos, you hear the honk honk, they get out of the way, they move people out of the way, and three men in a car drive off to the right, up the Main Street exit under the command of Fritz to go around and lead the armored car. All of these men, James Putnam, Lieutenant Pierce, and Sergeant Maxey, were aware of and who knew Jack Ruby. And all of them said that nobody, including Ruby, came down the ramp as the car was moving up the ramp and onto Main. That's a big deal because that timing was almost perfect. If you watch the videos that they have on YouTube related to when that car passes and how soon after Oswald is killed, you'd be pretty amazed. Now, another bit of evidence is Sergeant Flush was the watch commander and parked across the street when he watched the unmarked police car. So he's parked across Main Street. He watches Pierce's car drive up and out. He knows Ruby for years and years and says that Ruby did not walk down the Main Street ramp, was not anywhere near the ramp, and did not go down the ramp. Now, that seems pretty conclusive. Well, we'll come back to him in a second because I have a question about that. Harry Taster, a cabman, was hired by a reporter, as you can see, and he was parked across the street from Main as well, kind of near where Flush was. He's there from 9:40 to 12:25. If anybody would see anybody go down that ramp, it would have been Harry. And of course, Harry did not see Ruby go down the ramp. Another UPI reporter standing on the northern portion of the Main Street ramp, 5 minutes beforehand, does not see anyone come down the ramp. So there's finally a Detective Harrison. He watches the car. Pierce drives up, drives out, and does not see anyone come down the ramp. It's just repetitive and repetitive and repetitive. No one steps up and says, yes, they saw Ruby coming down the ramp, except for one man. Here's more of the official conclusions. He leaves Western Union at 11:18, walks down the Main Street ramp. He luckily arrives within minutes of Oswald being taken out, steps out of the crowd, shoots Oswald. Oswald ultimately dies. How convenient. Now let's look a little bit into the unofficial plan that needed to, or might have been, more of the impetus for why this happened and how this happened. There's a plausible motive. He can say that he's trying to spare Jackie and family the grief, which he did say. He has an alibi for his proximity at City Hall, the Karen Carlin money order, but we've already kind of proven that not to be the case. You want to avoid being seen entering the basement. And the only, well, and I say uninitiated personnel because someone had to help him. The only entrance into the basement that has virtually no people watching is the NX side, east side entrance through the parking lot. We'll get back to the arrive 1 to 3 minutes before Oswald shortly. He does have to blend in, so he's not thrown away. Maybe they look over and can see that he's in a suit and a tie and a hat. He must be another newsman like them all. And he must stand where he can be protected and not, not be put off his course, which John and I talked over a number of times and felt his best bet there would be to follow Croy through the railing, down a couple of steps to their location. So in technical terms, he did come down the Main Street ramp about 3/4 of the way down to 3 or 4 feet, 3 or 4 steps lower. And you have all the circles and diagrams as to where he was. But for virtually all of the people that are there, that scenario, walking past an unguarded Brock area, which is no longer there, an unguarded Worsley area, and everyone and their uncle facing where Oswald was going to be coming from, very few people would be able to pick out Mr. Ruby sneaking his way through the railing and being in the position he was. Oswald is being integral. Now let's go back to that 1 to 3 minute period before Oswald. How do we time that so perfectly? Okay, so Oswald's being interrogated at 10 a.m., which is the announced time of the transfer, but this time comes and goes. As I mentioned, Harry Holmes, who was at church with his wife, is called out of church and leaves, and is part of this interrogation and is asking him questions between 10 and 10:30 and 11:15. Ruby asks WAAP if Oswald has come down yet at 10:30. Now, Ruby either now has to move his car to the lot from wherever he's been parked. Has he been wandering around and asking these people, wandering in and out of the City Hall by moving his car repeatedly? Or did he park in one spot where the car was found later and just do all of this walking around, maybe going back to his car to wait, making phone calls where necessary? So he either has to move the car to the lot or the car has been in the lot the entire time. Is that a fair statement?
Mhm.
Okay. Ruby's car is parked across from the Western Union. He leaves the keys, the cash, and possibly Sheba in the car. He leaves, goes in. The receipt says 11:18, walks out, and he's given two choices to get to the annex. He could walk out and make a left, which would be facing policemen, not 50 yards down the road, and walk toward them, through them, and then past them to get to where he's trying to get to. Or, as I'm suggesting, I think he made the right turn, came around the back way, and took that alley straight down to the door. Very, very little likelihood of his being seen by many, if any at all, Dallas policemen, and he's already in. Either way, he's headed toward that door. Now this is where it gets interesting and speculative, my friends, because you only can prove so much. As I showed you earlier, and not mentioned very much by Fritz or Curry, was a door on the third floor of the city hall, which was the location for Fritz, Oswald, and Westbrook. Had a straight shot across. You could walk all the way across to the far left window of the four circles that I'm showing. Westbrook basically disappears after Friday. We have very, very, very little notification, notes, reports, conversations having to do with Westbrook after Friday evening. Westbrook and Croy were the ones who find the wallet incriminating Oswald. So it is our supposition, let me add one last piece of this. Captain Westbrook of personnel would have no problem walking in and out and around of anywhere in the Dallas Police Department building or the annex. He'd be the least likely to be bothered by anyone. Because really, as a captain of personnel, his interface with other people really shouldn't have been that overt. It was more behind the scenes. It was only on 11/24 that he chose not to be the captain of personnel anymore and become super cop. And arrive at every scene, being involved in every arrest, know everything about everything. So it is our feeling that because you cannot see this traversing of this parking lot getting to that door from City Hall, someone had to have seen him in one of those four windows and wandered back the same way, knocked on Fritz's door, which is how the interrogation ended. And after that knock, Oswald was being brought down within minutes. The interview abruptly stopped. Here's the Dallas Police Department and what it looks like on the third floor. This, in the center, is a large staircase, which I will show you shortly, that had, at the time, a pass-through, a main pass-through directly to the annex building. What they didn't talk too much about was around the corner from Westbrook was yet another pass-through from the third floor of the Dallas Police Department to the second floor of the annex building. And it's at the very bottom. And sadly, well, not sadly, but more than purposefully, that area, if you look on the original exhibit, is not notated with anything. You'd have no idea what that large black box is down there, or the fact that the only thing that gave some of it away was that there are stairs leading down to a door. You make the left turn down there to this black thing. And a little farther longer, you have another door. So evidently there is something back there. And if you remember back from early on, let's see here. Oh, where to go, where to go, where to go. It was in the first one. The circle on the left, the pink circle, that was a pass-through. That is the end of that hallway that we just showed you. At the bottom of that hallway behind the inspections was a door. And with some digging and persistence, John and I were able to find during construction photos as they were redoing the building and changing it from the current city hall to a university. They discovered amazing frescoes. They discovered amazing windows, and they also discovered this, that this had been blocked up after the restoration. This door leads down to the second floor of the annex building, which walks across directly to those windows overlooking that parking lot. Let's see, where are we now? Oh, nope. Okay, we also found videos during the process of redesigning the building, especially the top one between the second and third floor. On the landing between the first and the second floor, you can see down below a very large opening between the two buildings. The representation at the bottom right shows you where it would have been when you saw it walking up the stairs. We don't have any photographs other than during the reconstruction that we were able to find that people were able to travel back and forth through those buildings fairly easily, other than just having to go down to the basement and back up again. Now, Westbrook, as captain, as I mentioned, would easily move between any of the Dallas Police Department locations or the annex building. Testimony does show that a signal, a knock on Fritz's door, did stop the interrogation and did initiate the beginning of bringing Oswald down. Ruby is now on the way because he is seen coming through the parking lot. There is no way of knowing, of his knowing, when Oswald would be brought down, because Oswald would be brought down when it was most convenient for Ruby. Doing it the other way would have been very, very, very difficult. And if you'll notice in the analysis or the analyses that have been done by the investigations, they avoid that option like the plague. And I will get into why. So now, why would Westbrook be the guy who possibly acts as the lookout and tips off Fritz? Well, he ultimately is the source of the Tippett wallet, which connects Oswald with Heidel. He ultimately is the source of the windbreaker jacket that is not Oswald's size, but is indeed attributed to him on his run from killing Tippett to the theater. He is also the source of the pistol evidence. The pistol that supposedly kills Tippett is in the Department of Personnel's office on his desk with up to 8 other Dallas police officers scraping initials, looking at things. The pandemonium in that office, in Westbrook's office, and the fact that so much of the incriminating evidence passes through that man is mind-boggling, because I did an analysis paper at Kennedy and King's, in which I was able to find that there were 2 very distinct paths for the pistol. There's 2 different pistols. One pistol, it goes through a certain group of people and kind of disappears, while another goes through Westbrook and ultimately becomes the weapon in evidence.
David, can I just ask a question on that last point?
Okay.
Have you looked into, is there, I mean, if you go back to the 3rd floor plan, Is there an evidence room? Where would they ordinarily take any evidence should a crime be committed? Have you looked into the protocol, the police protocol?
Well, I've not looked into the protocol. What I looked into is the reporting of the actual events. And we have a couple of people, especially FBI agent Clemens, which I will show you in the wallets section of this a little later, that spoke to Oswald. It seems that all of the evidence, the wallets, the identification, not necessarily the pistol, but the things having to do with the incriminating part of stuff, were in the same interrogation room with Oswald, as opposed to evidence like you're saying. I mean, to me, you have Lieutenant Day, who's in charge of the firearms, in charge of quite a lot of the evidence. He supposedly locks the rifle in a safe, but has nothing to do at all with the pistol. So the pistol itself is very nebulous. From that standpoint, what it does illuminate, though, is where the rifle more than likely came from and how this stuff gets into the mix. Because I don't know how deep you guys know into the pistol, but the pistol and rifle can be traced back to Century International Arms out of Montreal, that then ships down and had shipped to a number of different distributors in the United States. That's where Hoover finds a list of a few hundred rifles, including number 2766 without a prefix. Turns out that entire shipment of 700 rifles or so included 6 or 7 duplicate serial numbers that matched the 100 rifle list that was supposedly sent to Klein's. So while I'm not exactly answering your, do they have an evidence place, what we were able to see was that not the evidence that incriminated the most and was most likely to be used to do so was the evidence within the room that Oswald was already in and being questioned, because you have an FBI agent who basically is asking him these questions while holding the wallet and showing him the picture. Like he just came into the room, picked up the wallet, is doing it. More than likely, the Oswald was handcuffed, so he wasn't going to have access to anything. The goofy part of that, as we all remember, is that not far after they put him in one of these rooms, after being searched a number of times, getting from the Texas Theater into the car, processed at DPD, and now into this room, they can still, hours later, find 4 live bullets.
Yeah,
and a bus transfer.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, you're iterating that this is the incriminating evidence. So, are you saying that the bus ticket, the bullets, the pistol, the rifle, are all in the Fritz's interrogation room? Is that and the jacket? You know,
I don't know necessarily the jacket. I don't believe Oswald was ever shown that jacket. But I do know that between the backyard photos, the wallet, the contents of the wallet, I believe the rifle was with Day in his safe. Either that, here's another little side piece. Day is driven back to to his office with the rifle by none other than FBI agent Odom. So what happens to that rifle, or what goes on between those two times, is, you know, anybody's guess. I've already written a paper and shown that the rifle Day is walking out of the Texas School Book Depository with is not CE 139. And gone to pretty good lengths to show that not only is it not 139, but you will also find nowhere in all of the volumes of every bit of evidence from every investigation a picture of what the caliber of that rifle was.
And so that the evidence, you're asserting that what, based on the shoulder strap, the scope, the length of the barrel, what's the key point there?
There is well, there was a stamp on the sight, the front sight, or the back sight rather, that again, you only have one photo of it in all of the evidence, and the evidence is the photo of it is extremely poor. I've done some reverse analysis, some negative analysis. I've tried a lot of different ways to come and figure out what it is that thing says. Because we have to remember too that Riva in Italy's job was to grind off everything that it said on the side of the rifle and simply write "Made in Italy." Now, "Made in Italy" is written on the side of the rifle, and the problem being if the serial number or the 6.5 M is gone, or the serial number looks a little different than the serial, that's a whole nother conversation to have, because I mean, I don't like to just throw too much stuff out there because a lot of it comes to my head. When I did the rifle analysis, I found that the shipping manifest coming from Italy with these rifles for Crescent, for Mr. Feldsot in New York City, the designation for this rifle was not C2566. It was C2, what was it? T255, 2565. I mean, I have a present. You have to go to Kennedy and King's and find my last thing on the rifle. But the Italian manifest doesn't match the serial number, and as we've all seen in past too, the serial number on a number of different photographs don't really even match each other. So the photograph that I have coming out of the Texas School Book Depository with Day holding the rifle gives us enough of a look to see that we should be able to make out the caliber in exactly the same spot the caliber is stamped in CE 139. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward thing. I found 4 items of dissimilarity between the 2 rifles, the one he carries and the one that's in evidence. Whether I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't look that way to me. So all I'm really trying to get.
Sorry, no, I mean, no, I think obviously we could keep going down rabbit holes here with every question, but just going back to the evidence collection protocol,
yeah,
and where stuff is stored. What about all the stuff picked up in Irvine and 1026 Beckley? Where was all that placed?
Well, they had, we have photographs, right? You know, the photographs of all the stuff on the floor. I would have to imagine it was in one of the evidence rooms, which they do have them littered around. They have these kind of empty, if you look to the right, for example, to the right of the yellow triangle, a rectangle rather, it says deputy officer, and then to the right of that is an empty room. Yeah. And to the right of that, another empty room. Above, there's property files. And let's see what else it says. Microfiche room. So again, you have a bunch of rooms to the north of the yellow square. You have large rooms down to the left over where Westbrook is. I believe that they put a lot of stuff on the floor. Well, again, not until later. We've got to remember too that the FBI took everything. So, you know, yeah. What got me was how the questions were asked of Oswald about the contents and the things in his wallet and the other items of evidence that were not, oh, go get that and bring it in so we can show them kind of stuff. It was all right there. That's how I see it. I mean, that's how we'll see it, and we'll see a little bit more of it soon.
But to sum up to your original point, I mean, there's absolutely no way that evidence should have been brought to a personnel officer. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Well, that is the overriding. You know, Westbrook being the captain of personnel, you know, here's the captain of personnel, and the one probable most important activity he needed to perform that day was the comfort and information to the Tippett family about one of his fallen officers. And they learn about this on television. He never speaks to them.
Yeah.
Not a good thing. So then you look at all of his activity and the lies about how he gets from his office down to Texas School Book Depository, and how he all of a sudden shows up here and there. And none of the stories that he tells conforts with what the people who were there or were with him say. So, I mean, he'll tell you he drove up into the back of the Texas Theater, when in reality, we all see him coming into the front. I mean, he just doesn't ever give us anything concrete other than things like the Tippet wallet, which we can see him playing with. This is a little bit even more, now we bring Westbrook back around to that day. And as you can see on the left, he was given the job to find out who saw what in the basement. He was part of that investigative crew. And he indicated in 78 that the alley door that we're talking about that leads to the annex parking lot was not checked that morning, although they have no idea why he made this statement. On the right is the House Select Committee discussions on some of these. And what's highlighted here is their conclusion that the alley route was the most likely alternative because of the factors of time and distance and lack of security in the garage area and along the entire route, and the testimony concerning the security of the doors along the route. This possibility was not considered or investigated by the FBI or the Dallas Police Department, and virtually ignored by the Warren Commission. If that doesn't set off red bells, nothing does. You ignore what you don't. Now I'm going to add a little bit of something to the history of Westbrook and Ruby. In 1953, our man Westbrook was involved with Ruby on a charge of carrying a concealed weapon. He was released by Patton and the other policemen under permission of Captain Westbrook. So Captain Westbrook had been around as a captain awfully long time, at least those 10 years. And if we move over, Westbrook then says that he did do it, but he doesn't recall a whole lot about it. Now, how important or not important is this? It does establish the fact that in his history, he aided Ruby to get out of an arrest or the consequences of his actions. This happens a lot with Ruby. Ruby seems to be able to say things, do things, go places, and never spend time in jail. It's not significant time, especially in Dallas, and definitely not anything related to a federal crime. So who he was associated with beyond Dallas and Chicago and possibly California with a man named Nixon and Prescott Bush, we don't know. We know that there are threads and connections there. And as we look and search more and more detailed, people get more minute, we may find more things. I just found these to be very interesting. Wasn't expecting to find that. So let's talk about how Oswald then is brought to Ruby. I mean, we've been able to establish now that Ruby walks around in a manner so that he's not seen by as many police as possible, goes into a door, goes off to the right, follows a hallway to the back of that stairway, comes down the stairway, and now is in the basement, fairly dark. And the only other person that we can think of might being there is Kenneth Croy. So I bring in Detective James Watson talking about the fact that when Oswald was announced to be coming through, it kind of got pandemonious down there. People were pushing forward, people came over the railings, people came over the fences, everything got very, very, very tight, despite the fact that they hired and had all of these policemen lining the rows. Let's talk about Croy again. Now, where was Croy? You station yourself at the foot of the Main Street ramp in the basement. Yes. Okay. The timing of that was after the armored car had already been there, which we knew after it moved from one side to the other, did not leave much more than 10 minutes between the time that was and when Oswald was brought down. Croy confirms this. You would think you were there as long as 5 minutes? Yes. 10 minutes? Not so much. 15 sounded like it was way too long. So now you're looking at a time between 5 and 10 minutes that he's there. And in my opinion, and the way we saw it, was that he's there waiting for Ruby to be seen walking out that stairs so that he can join him. Griffin then gets to the meat of the matter and finally gets Croy to admit that he then turned, well, he's reading a statement of Croy's. I then turned my attention back to the reporters which were standing in front of me. I believe this man to have been Jack Ruby. Now, what do you do as a police officer, even a reserve police officer whose job is to guard the basement, to someone you know is not in the press corps? And if anything, you know enough about Jack Ruby, having been around the Dallas police, to be a little suspect. Now, Griffin again, who was really quite surprised at all of this, says he doesn't understand. It says, I understand in your affidavit that you saw a man you claimed to be Jack Ruby. Croy says, I believe that when I wrote it up. I believe it was him. And Croy brings it back around, rather Griffin brings it back around to get Croy to say to myself, I still believe it was Jack Ruby. So even if it was a minute, which is, count out a minute, that's more than enough time to say something to somebody, to move him back, to realize he doesn't belong there, to any of the people down there who knew Jack Ruby, knew that he might not belong there. But so few people saw him. He was kind of behind other people, and he didn't make himself that well known. This diagram is some sort of the means by which we felt this was accomplished. Western Union in the parking lot, as we showed in the map before, is to the right. He goes in through that door of the dotted green line, through the hallway, in the back of the stairway, down the stairway, over to the rail, and works his way down to where Croy joins him. Alternate, could Croy have walked in front of him to block, to act as a little bit of a blocker as Ruby walked down? Could he have taken a different route? Maybe, no doubt. I think our point here, though, is we're starting to show with some serious support that Ruby did not go down the Main Street ramp, and that this annex entrance was not only hardly guarded, but the most likely way to gain entry and be where they needed to be when he needed to be there. The whole thing, though, had to start with someone seeing Ruby coming towards the door. Now, I can't guarantee you that it was Westbrook. I'd like to believe it was, only because there's very few other people with that kind of authority who would not be questioned walking through and walking around and doing whatever he wanted to do in those two buildings. More importantly is the stripping of security, what little there was in that path between that stairs and the murder scene, by the only two people, one of them, actually both of them, who would have recognized Ruby in a second.
Can you just clarify who reassigned Brock and Worsley? Was it Dean or Captain Talbot?
It was actually done through Pierce and Putnam. Now, Pierce and Putnam, Pierce was the lieutenant. He was the one driving the car. Putnam was one of his assistants. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story about Putnam a little later. I have a slide on that. And Dean was part of the execution of the orders, but he doesn't get very detailed into, he tells you what happened, and I'll show you a little bit about that later, and very craftily avoids who the reserve officer replacing Brock wound up being.
Is this a natural point to have a break, David, or do you want to continue a bit?
I'm totally up to you. I'll leave that to you guys.
Well, I think it feels like we ought to have a comfort break, or
Okay.
get a glass of wine or something. There is also one question in the chat box that we
Okay.
ought to ask when we come back as well.
Well, give me the question.
If anybody else wants to put any questions in chat rather than asking directly, please do so during the break.
Go ahead and give me that that question, so I have a few seconds to think about it.
Okay, so it's from David Percox. Was Westbrook likely in the pay of the Dallas Mafia, or maybe an earlier CIA plant, bearing in mind OSS/CIA involvement with wartime and post-war suppression of Italian communists by Sicilian Mafia? So that's one for you to get your teeth around.
That's the Gladio people. If they're referring to the Gladio people left behind?
I don't know. David can't talk because he's got a mic problem.
Okay, well, if he writes
if he wants to elaborate on that,
yeah, I mean, it has
please
to do
do
with
so,
Gladio.
David, in the chat box.
Okay, we'll hit that when you get back.
Okay, so let's just take a 5-minute break, please, guys.
You got it. Because see now,
Pete, sorry to interrupt. Would you mind, Peter? Sorry to interrupt. I paused the recording. Would you mind asking that question again?
Yeah.
Please. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, okay. DJ, so the question again, where is the evidence that Billy Grammer passed the telephone, the 2 a.m., 3 a.m. telephone call warning of the elimination of Oswald?
Yes, we are to remember that just prior, the day before, Ruby and Grammer spent about an hour together talking, whatever they were talking about. Now we are the next day. Grammer claims that he does get the call in the middle of the night, that he does recognize, and writes his little report to Curry. And rather than through channels, he hands it to Curry. Now, Grammer was not called to testify.
No.
Curry did not acknowledge the existence of this affidavit, yet does fairly soon after the delivery is claimed, takes 2 of his deputies and talks about securing Oswald's safety with an armored car.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not Curry believes Grammer that it was Ruby, I don't know how that would possibly change too much of the events, because it didn't seem, no matter, I mean, you didn't hear anything from the FBI. So what? And the whatchamacallit, our friends at the Dallas Police Department didn't change or do anything as a result of these kinds of threats, other than talking about a decoy now. So yeah, there were threats.
Okay, yeah.
Right? I mean, it makes sense that there were threats and they were heard and they were recorded. Whether they were indeed Ruby at night, he was wandering around at that time in the morning. He makes calls from all kinds of different places. It's very possible. Now, why he would warn them when his personal and related business operations survival would be dependent on him killing Oswald when he was supposed to, that next morning, why would he warn them?
Yep.
So I have a tough time with it being Ruby, and maybe again being Ruby. Maybe Ruby wanted the credit, and that's what Ruby talked to Grammer about before he went, for their 1 hour. And calls are going to be made. People to think you can tell them it was me, so that I don't know. I honestly wish I had better information for you on that one. But I do know the calls were made. I do know these two people knew each other fairly well, and I do know that Curry did make changes and did change. After that information was ultimately conveyed to him.
Okay.
Hope that answers a little.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
good enough.
This was where we left, and here's basically the same idea, with a little bit more explanation on the timing and where they were at the time. So you have him coming in from Western Union. You have a man named Turner who sees Ruby 30 seconds before the shooting standing behind Croy. So he's already there. Croy's lying here. Not necessarily, this was a supposition. I think we should have put a second line in here, a purple line that also parallels with Ruby, with him kind of walking ahead and kind of blocking anyone seeing Ruby as they're walking up. I would think that would be a little bit more important, but again, don't know the details of how they got from one place to the other. I was able to find about an hour and a half of running TV tape of the middle camera that would have showed the car go by. It showed a lot of extra time and scene that most people haven't seen or taken the time to see. And I watched very, very, very carefully in slow motion to see if I could pick Croy or Ruby walking across the field of vision of these cameras, because you couldn't get from where the word Croy was to where the word Ruby was without passing these cameras. And I was simply not able to find anyone. And then all of a sudden the car comes for, moving everybody out of the way to leave. That's Pierce, Putnam, and Massey.
On the Ed forum, I've only just read this actually, and it seems new to me. There's a thread on John Martino and his whereabouts, and someone's posted on that I think this was the 18th of November, that Ruby was in Vegas, and it's purported that he came back to Dallas with a lot of money, and told somebody that he was going to sort out his
taxes, yeah,
IRS stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, have you heard that, and you go along with that?
I don't doubt that. I can't imagine them. Can't imagine. Let's put it in. I always try to add some kind of dichotomy here. You have a choice, right? So either they ordered him to do this with no pay, with no other than we'll take care of your family because we're the mafia kind of people, or we're going to pay you and make you and take care of you and take care of your bills and if you do this, although he's paid before he kills them. So he's given money.
And on the 18th, which is probably assuming quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have a lot of things locked down to, I don't know that the mafia likes to give away their money too much. So from what I remember, John and his sources, and I from reading through John's, where is it? The men who would have talked, Larry Hancock's books. I see that as very possible, but I have always felt that the source of information is got to be the most important factor in determining the validity of that information. And I just have a difficult time believing as factual anything from someone in the mafia. It's just one of those, they'd lie to lie about lying. And politicians kind of fall in the same category. So money needed for Vegas, and could that be a little bit of a extra alibi, putting it aside to make sure Ruby does what he's supposed to do? I'd have to read a little bit more about Martino and understand. I mean, is this something he heard secondhand or knows firsthand?
Well, I think they were talking about where John Martino was over the period, and he was tailed by FBI in exactly the same way that Giancana was. Practically somebody stepping on his heels. And I think there's a blank period over the days prior and post assassination where they didn't know where Martino had got to. And then it's been added on to that on the 18th, Ruby traveled to Vegas, and it's when he came back, probably the next day, the 19th, that he was full of money.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will definitely dig into it a bit more so. I want to find, yeah, I wonder if it originated in Hancock's book, but you're saying it's on the Ed Forum now too?
Yeah, it's a thread looking at Martino.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll find that, take a read through, and we'll get back to you through Neil and see whether there's anything to be concerned about over there. I mean, obviously it makes sense that when you're in trouble with the IRS and you walk away, now all of a sudden you have cash. Isn't that also like a double-edged sword? I mean, if all of a sudden you show up with $50,000 to pay off your tax debt, don't you have to pay taxes on the $50,000? How'd you get the money?
Yeah.
So that was just a thought, but I'll definitely look into it. It sounds like a very interesting part of the thing. I don't know motivationally why he would have done what he done. There's many theories on that. I tried in my work to stay to the evidences, the conspiracy, and focus on what was given us, what does it say, and does it actually relate to our understanding of the assassination or the understanding of the conspiracy. And so far, I'm not finding very much in terms of indicative of the assassination. It seems to be part and parcel of the plan and the conspiracy. So knowing he had money and getting paid by quote unquote the mafia to go, and now he kills Oswald, it sure does start putting the onus on the mafia as opposed to the FBI, CIA, and government. So maybe the mafia is killing the guy that the mafia had killed Kennedy.
Well, yeah.
So it's all mafia. I mean, it just winds up being all mafia. And as we both know from the HSCA and Blakey, that was the big line for all those years, was that it had to have been the mafia. They subverted a plan and turned it away from Castro and toward JFK, and to that end, I asked simply one question: name the mafia people in Bethesda's autopsy room.
Yeah, sure, and organized crime couldn't organize Oswald's modus operandi through 63. No, but we also know CIA, and we've mentioned Martino. You know, they were hand in glove in Florida with
Yep, Traficante.
So, you know.
Yeah, no, you know, to me at that time, to divide between mafia and CIA, I thought would be very, very difficult for most. So I get it was in their best, both of their best interests that Ruby be highly motivated to take care of this situation. That I would agree. So he's motivated, but at the same time, these are not stupid people when it comes to carrying out these kinds of plans. And I mean, I just can't imagine being in the room working this thing out and they're talking about, oh yeah, and then you're just going to walk down Main Street in front of everybody, God in the world, right past Vaughn, who knows you for years, say hi, turn left, and just John down nobody's going to notice. Everything will be fine. That makes no sense. It just makes no sense. And when we come to find that the reality of that accusation only comes from one person, ever. And let's get into that. Because our man, Bert Griffin, which was a lawyer on the Warren Commission, wasn't going to take the BS that was being thrown around as to how this happened and why it happened. Griffin and Herbert were assigned, let's see, no, how do I get this? Oh, there we go. So they knew that it was between 11:17 and 11:21 that morning, that we had definite timestamps as to when something happened, when he left, and when the next thing happened. So you only had 3.5 minutes to get just through a parking lot. And I mean, it really wasn't that difficult. But we are told by the House Select Committee that the FBI had no interest in pursuing the annex entry angle on things. Turns out on the 26th of June in '64, FBI agents did walk from the Western Union through the lot into the annex building, followed the exact path that we outlined earlier, and had more than a whole minute left before Oswald would have been coming down. The timing worked out perfectly. Ooh. How do I go to the next one? Next, oh, there we go. Come on. Oh. Why can't I get my stuff? No, navigator. There it is. Okay. So let's look into these people. Let's look into the people who are most connected to accusing and detailing where Ruby was and where he came from. Croy, our man Croy with the wallet, claims that Ruby, and most of you have seen the film 100 times and recognize very quickly that Croy is once again lying. Ruby ran by me at a pretty good clip. He was gaining momentum, ran through the line of reporters like a fullback. Now, Cross saw film clips of the shooting and said, the ones that I saw were the ones that I was trying to get the gun from Ruby. The problem being is if you watch these films, all 3 or 4 angles of them, Croy disappears the second Ruby jumps from the crowd and shoots Oswald. You will not see him anywhere. The film clip shows that Ruby just lunged forward and Croy backed off. And Griffin knew pretty well right out of the gate that Croy was lying. Now, Griffin then turned his focus on the first and only person who said that Ruby gained access. And this is Sergeant Patrick Dean. And Sergeant Patrick Dean becomes the linchpin to this whole thing. Sergeant Dean, on the top is an FBI drawing of the elevation from the side and overhead. You can see where it says Sergeant Dean, he was up by the armored car. And we give some attempts at line of sight. I've seen the photographs. You've all probably seen the photographs. There's, to get down, well, here it is. Let's see. Yeah, there's walls. You can't see down once you're up higher. This is about 3/4 of the way down the Main Street ramp. If you were to go back up for a while, you couldn't see anything, as you can see from the middle graphic. The bottom just simply shows, according to the Warren Commission, where everybody was when Oswald was shot. And I turned it upside down to compare to the top map to show you how far and what was between him and the Oswald shooting. His testimony he could never have seen anyone coming down a Main Street ramp at all, let alone what was going on at the bottom of the underground basement. Again, turn back around. We feel that Ruby and Croy, or just Ruby, walked through those, climbed through those railings, which nobody was really looking at. As you can see, the number of circles, everyone is looking in another direction. Everyone is looking that way with the cars in that direction, even though they'll have to wind up driving up the other way. Ruby and Croy are right next to each other a minute before he's brought down. After he shoots, Jack is known for saying, "You all know me, I'm Jack Ruby." Ruby said, "You're not going to believe this." Now he was just able to walk on in. The thing is, he didn't complete that sentence until later when he started to talk to someone else. In a report to Curry, our man Patrick Dean said that Ruby told him in the presence of Mr. Sorrells that Ruby had entered the basement through the ramp entering on Main Street. Ruby says, "I walked in the Main Street ramp. I had just been to the Western Union to mail money, money order to Fort Worth, which we've earlier shown was really not possible in terms of that phone call. I saw Sam Pierce drive out of the basement at that time, and at that time the car drove out is when I walked in." We got testimony from Pierce, we got testimony from Putnam, we got testimony from Massey that he was not there. Agent Sorrells, arguing with Dean, said that he had never reported that Ruby said any such thing in the room with Dean. At the very, very beginning, Fritz tells Dean to bring Sorrells up to Ruby. Now Sorrells, and when I found that the Sorrells said Ruby said no such thing, and I went to Sorrells's notes, and there it is, down in the middle of the page on the right, where it says "come in off Main Street, off of ramp." Sorrells now clarifies that. For a while, I thought there was a conflict with what he was taking notes while they were questioning Dean. Turns out that these were questions and observations of Sorrells while Fritz was asking Dean questions, asking Ruby questions. You'll notice the word basement is not shown, just that he came in off Main Street, off of ramp. Now, that's simply Ruby replying his standard manner of what he says he did to get down there. When I got back to City Hall, Sergeant Dean says he contacted Pierce and advised him. Pierce told him that he had talked to Ruby and told me that he had gotten into the basement, was breaking security, and that thrown under the bus will be Officer R.E. Vaughn, and he was the man involved. So now Dean, the only man who has seen Ruby and claims to have seen Ruby, is now throwing an officer under the bus for having let this man down. In turn, Pierce notified Talbot, and Talbot's aware of it. Sergeant Maxey was in the car. Do you know him? Do you know him by sight? Did you see him at all anytime that day? Oh, no, 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 no. When the man would have been right there by the car as they drove out. Lieutenant Pierce, driving the car, has known Ruby for 12 or 13 years. You're starting to get the pattern here that Ruby knew a few people at the Dallas Police Department. So he would not have any difficulty recognizing him. Hubert asks, and Pierce says, I would have no trouble at all. And by the way, no, I didn't see him that day at all. Is he protecting something? Not protecting something? He didn't see him because he knows he went somewhere else. I don't know whether Putnam's in on it or not, but here's the sideline on Putnam that I like you to know. Remember car 207 that goes Hong Kong passing Beckley that Earlene Roberts hears? Yes? Is that a story you're aware of? No?
Yes, we are.
Oh,
We are,
okay.
David. Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
everyone's got their microphones on mute.
No, no problem. I just wanted to make sure that we were aware that at some point, Earlene claims that two people in car number 207 honked in front of Beckley and then drove off. Turns out that Westbrook writes a little memo claiming that the keys to car 207 had been given to Putnam, and that Putnam was always around Elm and Houston with no proof, no substantiation, just the word of Westbrook. Putnam, of course, is not called to testify. How convenient. So let's talk about the hearsay that did get thrown around related to what Ruby told his lawyers and what seemed to come out little by little. Turns out, I guess, that Tom Howard, Ruby's first attorney, kind of suggested very strongly how to approach the publicity related to this, and claims through these articles, in reference back to Newsweek, that Tom himself tells him that he should say he shot Oswald so that Carolyn and Mrs. Kennedy wouldn't have to come to Dallas to testify. Now, that was the story for a little while. That's interesting. We all know that that's not the case. More importantly, though, is that during the time Howard was with Ruby, Ruby was very hesitant about discussing his entrance into the basement of City Hall. Now, Howard says it's because he didn't want to get police officers or police officer friends in trouble, but he doesn't explain what Ruby said about how he got in. He just simply doesn't want to get friends in trouble. Another note is claimed to have been sent also during that trial from Tom, or rather from Ruby to his lawyer, Tonahel, that Joe, you should know it was Tom Howard who told me to say that I had come via the ramp. I wish this could be a little bit more solid, a little bit more credible. It makes some sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have information come out from Tunhill or Howard that would make the situation worse for their clients. But that seems to be what they did, is they needed to avoid the reality of where he came in and the reality of the three people, in my opinion, and in our opinion, Fritz, Westbrook, and Croy, who enabled this process to happen. You let that sink in. If this was the first and only person to ever say it, how does that become the urban legend of how it happened? Well, was Vaughn never had any real problems. They didn't bust him down to nothing. And I don't think there was any way they were going to allow upper level Dallas Police Department personnel like Westbrook captain and Fritz captain down, that they were going to take care of this killer. Griffin feels most that Dean is lying and really feels like he has to do something about it. Not sure many of you are aware of the trouble Griffin gets in. We're going to talk a little bit about that now. On the 24th, Griffin was pretty sure Dean was lying about how he got into the basement, because the overall evidence, as we've been talking about and shown, is that he did not enter down the Main Street ramp. And that Griffin suspected, like we're presenting today, that he did enter via the stairway adjacent to the elevators after coming in through the side door at the annex. He asked Dean for the names of the people guarding the area. This is where I was referring to before, hoping to find the name of the unnamed reserved officer. So you have Vaughn at the entrance, you have Nelson at the doorway, you have Patterson on Commerce, and I assigned one reserve officer to the southern portion of the basement. Well, the southern portion of the basement and where the elevators are, I would call the elevators the middle of the basement. Am I being picky? Maybe. But if I'm being assigned to the southern portion of the basement, that could comport with that darker area south from which Croy could have walked from and met Ruby. Either way, Dean is not going to tell you who that person is. Griffin waited, but Dean was silent. Now, this is the inside of the newly renovated but same location building of the annex. This faces number 3 is the service elevator. Number 2 and 1 are the regular passenger elevators. And that in the yellow circle is the stairway door that leads down to the basement. There's an identical door on the other side of that, around the corner from elevator 2, down the hall from the service elevator. Mr. Griffin is talking to Dean, who supposedly is in charge of securing the basement, and asks who checked the door, the stairway door to the garage that leads up to the municipal building. Mr. Dean couldn't be more confused. He has no idea there's a door. I don't know of any door that leads up into the stairway. And finally, the door is over by the elevator. Oh yes, now he remembers. And now our favorite two, Putnam and Dean, have been responsible for checking and making sure it was locked. Griffin, knowing like a good lawyer to have all the answers, says, did you know at the time you checked that even though the door was locked from the outside, it could be opened from the inside? Crickets. Mr. Dean was caught. So they let that sink for a second in terms of the way they went after securing the basement, and they moved on to Brock. So now, where did you station Brock? He asks Dean. Dean, or rather Brock, was the man downstairs guarding these 3 elevators in that stairway. Very, very commendable, except he was removed at 10:45. And an unnamed reservist is put down there. So during Griffin's questioning, Dean fails to ID the reservist taking the break. He sticks to the story that he saw Ruby coming down the ramp. Now, Griffin knows that that just is not the case and thinks that Dean is hiding material facts and that Dean may have been in a position at some point along the way to have stopped Ruby, which is maybe why he's lying. I don't know that they know why he's lying yet, but he is. Griffin and Herb Hubert send a memo to Rankin for further investigation into this very specific part of the story. Dean complains to District Attorney Wade about Griffin's questioning and badgering. Our man Wade calls the president, Johnson, who in turn pressures Warren. Wow. Texas Attorney General Wagner Carr accompanies Dean to DC. They share the complaints with Warren, but Griffin is not allowed to confront Dean at the Warren-Dean meeting. In end, it is Griffin who gets reprimanded and life goes on. We'll see that Dean gets his desserts later. Here we will. Griffin's asked, I always thought all along about the Dallas police that anything that we would get into trouble or embarrass them, they would lie to us about. No question about it. In '64, Jack Ruby was found guilty, but his conviction was overturned. The appellate court found that Dean's testimony should not have been admitted during the trial. That it was all hearsay, unbacked by anyone, and predatory. Now, could that have been the plan all along? That Dean do what he do? I don't know about that kind of time frame capability, but anything's possible. I sadly was not a spy in my last life, so I really don't know. I guess we'd have to ask John Newman. There are a few loose ends I wanted to talk about. Roy Vaughn spoke with Lieutenant Pierce for 3 hours after Oswald was shot and insisted that he had not come down the ramp. Vaughn is then sent to Chief Byrd to make an appointment and visit the attorney, Alex Bickley, and during their meeting, Bickley asked Vaughn not to go to court. The truth might come out about how Ruby got into the basement. So what actually happened and what the story is has become more and more obvious that that wasn't the means of his entry and his ability to shoot at exactly the right time. Reiterating, Detective Harrison did not see anyone coming down the ramp. And he watched the car driven by Lieutenant Pierce going up the ramp. The claim in the official story is that as Vaughn turned around to talk to someone and the car was coming up, he slipped past the car and down and made his way down the ramp. Problem is, you have Mr. Harrison here, Detective Harrison, who would have corroborated such a thing. He didn't. This Flush guy really bothers me a little bit in the way he talks about in his words themselves. He knows Jack for many, many years, and he specifically says Ruby did not walk down Main Street, which was outside. Well, he was parked across the street. So he could say authoritatively that the man did not walk down Main Street, was not anywhere near the ramp. Okay, and did not go down the ramp. I don't know about you guys. It just sounds to me that making those kinds of statements, you know where the man is. Or am I being too presumptuous? Maybe I am. The man was across the street. He didn't see anybody. That's fine. Could he have seen him going across the parking lot? Yeah. Was he asked about being seen going across the parking lot? No. So as long as he stuck to the official story, it sounds, he did not see Ruby doing the things the Warren Commission asked him to confirm. Years later, the House Select Committee, even with Blakely and the specter of the CIA looming high above it, we're still able to conclude after reading that this alley route was the most likely alternative. And as I read before, was not even considered by the investigative bodies and ignored by the Warren Commission. If that's not a red flag for something that's important, that we've seen repeatedly in this case, I don't know what else is. Finally, still does not consider timing based on move-ins conveyed to Fritz. See, even the Select Committee in their last paragraph is focused on how Ruby could have timed it, as opposed to how they could have timed Oswald being where he needed to be, which is what they had 100% control over. They had no control over Ruby in terms of being at a certain place at a certain time and wait there until we decide to bring Oswald. Which is why I believe it looked like some kind of coincidence until, like everything else in this case, you scratch a little further and look a little deeper. So that's the real reason. And I have a blank page here. The only, in my opinion, weak link in all of this is trying to conclude that it was Westbrook who provided the information that Ruby was on his way. It could have been someone else stationed there to watch, and they could have easily called Westbrook, who walked over and knocked on the door. A lot of different methods could have been done. The reality of the circumstance, though, is that within a minute of Ruby leaving the Western Union, Oswald was on his way. And the only way that that can happen is that someone knows Ruby's coming and is able to get that information to Fritz in the interrogation room without it raising any kind of red flags. Given that Westbrook, you'll see a little later, at one point probably handed Fritz this Tippet wallet that Croy founds, that gives to him, that now Fritz has in front of his hands, a wallet that has the ID that incriminates his suspect, and other wallets start to show up and things get a little wallet weird. So I'm going to stop and break for another really quick second here, answer any concerns or questions about the fact that Ruby took a completely different route, had nothing to do with Vaughn, and that Dean subterfused the reality of Croy, Westbrook, and Fritz putting together the necessary parts and components to have the man brought to his own execution.
Well, that was a great section, David. A lot to unpick there as well. What evidence do you have that the interview was stopped abruptly? Because that's key to this as well, isn't it? That
Yes.
They've got to time this. You've got a couple of minutes for
Sure.
Ruby to make his way through the annex building down to the basement and so forth. He can't be there too early, as you know.
Right.
And he can't be there too late. So key to the thing that they're in control of, obviously, is the interrogation. Do you have evidence that it was actually abruptly ended?
Yes, we do. As we say, Holmes was in there. It's kind of strange that he decided to leave his wife at the church that they went to every Sunday to go down and be involved in this specific interrogation at this specific time when they had agreed to a 10 o'clock leaving time. At 10 o'clock, Oswald wasn't, Ruby wasn't anywhere seen yet coming toward the annex building. So Holmes and Fritz questioned him. Holmes questioned him about minutia things like post office boxes and where did you sign up for that? And how come this person isn't on this form? And they went around and around for a while until, in our opinion, we know that that shortly after the banging on the door, the interview with Holmes and Fritz was wound up. It was stopped. They want us to bring Oswald down now. We've got to go. And if, again, you see someone walking the way I was expecting them to walk, they have about a 2-minute walk to get to where they need to. Same kind of stuff up there. There, Oswald is in the Fritz jail cell. They take him in the elevator down. That can't be much more than a minute or two. The timing really is a lot closer than you could possibly believe. Maybe it takes a little longer to end. We do know he shot at 11:20.
Do you know why?
And-
Do you know why Holmes was involved in the interview process? Is this all around the PO box, or
The money order.
Sorry.
This, again, this is an opinion thing based on the facts that I've seen and the evidence that I've seen. I did a whole bit of paper on the rifle being related to the money order and the reality that Holmes's discovery of the money order is only one of 3 other discoveries of the money order. So Holmes is basically lying about the money order and the procurement of the rifle. Holmes is involved in questioning him and rewriting the interrogations and his notes. The biggest thing, though, being Holmes claiming to have found the stud of the money order, and immediately within an hour on the morning of the 23rd, having access to the money order. The money order was in process. So this is now Saturday morning by noon or so, when in the reality and all of the other reports, we come to find that the money order, as we see it, arrives from 2 other locations. The Secret Service says they found it in Kansas City. Harold Jacob Marks and all of the initials on the back of the money order occur at 10 p.m. on Saturday night, after people have gone into the postal locations in Alexandria, Virginia, quote unquote, warmed up the computers and was able to find the money order. This is a location that could create a money order from scratch by any book from any place. Now, back to questions and Holmes. Holmes's book was a series of postal order purchases, of which they would be torn off. There are 3 parts to them. There's the part that is given to the customer. There is the part that is given to the customer as a receipt, the first one, the one that they send out. And then there's one that stays in the book as a record from the post office that that particular PO is gone. And there's a reference to it. Holmes claims that they found the stub that had the reference amount that they were talking about. The problem is there is no stub. There is no book showing the numbers of the tickets that run consecutively for those purchase orders. I mean, money order, postal order. And the number on the orders are a magnitude of size larger than the numbers being used at the time. So Holmes was intricately involved in setting up some of the incriminating evidence against Oswald. Why he chose to come and do this at this time? Maybe he wanted to be there to see Oswald killed. I don't know. Maybe that was the way they could easily figure out to let someone elongate the time until Ruby showed up.
It's interesting that you have him as a bad actor, given I mean his family see him as a real hero in the whole saga, don't they?
Yeah. So, you know, there's very little you can take on face value from Mr. Holmes. He really was part of the let's railroad Oswald as quickly as we can crowd, and his wanting to be there, I'd have to think in the same morbid vein as LeMay wanting to be in the autopsy room, you know?
Okay, I've got another one. It's just
Sure.
The lines of should we just about query everything. Is the Western Union timestamp at 11:17 genuine in terms of the time and the day even?
They did. They
I've
did
not
follow
looked, I've
this.
not looked into this, but I'm just.
Yeah, my understanding.
Is it nailed on? Because obviously, it's
Yeah.
not. If it's not nailed on, the whole Western Union, part of the narrative and coming from the alleyway and so forth is irrelevant.
No, I think as he's trying to create his reason for even being there and the fortitude of his being able to wander in and take care of Oswald, he has to have done these things. These calls had to have been made, so Carlin had to call him at a certain time to tell him that he needed these things. And it was done long distance so that we have a timestamp. The Western Union now has a timestamp, and they've talked to the man at the Western Union, and that comports with the time that he came in and did the transaction. So from what we've understood and what we've been able to see, there's nothing to negate the timestamp on an actual order that was purchased and sent. The problem being, of course, the call that was made was at a point in time when Ruby was already downtown and not at his home. So it gets a little sticky there.
If he was downtown for several hours prior to it, why was he late? That's kind of, given that they had to prolong the interrogation.
Well, and I honestly could not tell you for sure why, if he's out in front of City Hall or near City Hall at 10:30, why wouldn't he begin the process then?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And he's asking people. Well, not sure. I wish I had a better answer for that. At those locations, he's not seen walking toward the annex building. He can't get into his position to kill Oswald with as little interference potential as possible by going in the means from where he was seen at those earlier times. I think his going into the Western Union for the $25 kind of quiets down the circumstances for a little while, for those few minutes while he's waiting in there and doing the transaction and whatever it might be. And again, to me, I see him making another right and coming around the back way so that he doesn't have to interfere with anybody. But that's just how maybe he's so cocky and doesn't care. He makes the left and cuts across and just walks in the door that way. Either way, the minute the person in the third floor window at the annex sees Oswald, sees him starting to walk toward, you start about a 2-minute clock, because that's about how long it took. So in that 2 minutes, if that's happening at 11:19 now, or 11:18, which is when they started to see him, and the word now gets back to Fritz, bang, 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 let's bring him down. The timing suggests, as long as there's no major screw-ups, that Ruby would be down there anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds before they brought down Oswald. That would make sense. At least that's how I see it, given the different pieces of information.
Do you do you know that there was a knock on the door for?
Yes.
That's a fact, is it?
Yes.
Okay. And where
They
was?
don't know who. They don't know who.
Whose testimony was that?
Oh, I believe it was Fritz, but I will find out for you.
It could have been a knowing glance through the window.
Knock on the door. I was almost sure. I mean, that's how I remember researching it and do it. Who, when, but I will definitely look deeper into that and get that information out to you so you can get it to the group. Let me do just a little bit more about this wallet thing, which I think will help bring you back into some vision of Westbrook and Croy again. This is very, very strange. Now, as we said, there's 5 wallets. Most of the world knows that there's only 2. Most of the world really only knows that there's one wallet with a bunch of stuff in it that incriminated Oswald. Okay. We all have to agree, though, that in inventory, there was a red and brown wallet that Stovall Rose had on their inventory. They're given numbers. The evidence exists. The records of the evidence exists. The Tippett scene wallet, where an officer is asking Barrett, do you know who Heidel is? Do you know who Oswald is? And Barrett, FBI agent Barrett, says no. Gives the impression that there was identification in that wallet that had these names and that they looked at it. We've seen pictures of it. That's this over here, top left. On the bottom left, you have the red billfold card and the brown billfold with the Marine group photo, which we'll get back to later. Then there's the car, Bentley pulls a wallet billfold in the car back to Dallas Police Department out of Oswald's back pocket. And in this pocket, they ask Hill, what did Bentley say? And Hill says, well, he said something about a name Oswald and that there was another name in there. And our lovely ball, I think, or questioner says, Alec Heidel, something like that. It was like, yeah, something like that. So that's how they put those two together in the car. Finally, there's a studded wallet in a photograph from the Dallas Police Department over here, for which there is no explanation and no discussion. It does seem that the piece of paper on the left, although illegible, might have been the piece of paper where they claim that the coupon came from for the ordering of the gun. At the bottom right is photographs you start to see and associate with the wallet Oswald had and the ID that was contained in it. In photographs at the Dallas Archives, these barely legible things are described as the contents of Oswald's wallet from his home. Now, this obviously wasn't done before these were sent to the FBI and returned because of all the fingerprint analysis that's involved here. The Dallas police did fingerprint analysis that didn't leave anywhere near as much smudging and inking as when the FBI did it and tried different types of inks and different types of methods to get information off of these cards. But even if you zoom into them much, you will find that they're all Lee Oswald cards. Nothing in this says anything about a Heidel. So my next task for myself was, are there reports that talk about the different contents of the wallets across different amounts of time? And of course there are. On the 22nd, our man Clements, Special Agent Clements, compiles a report based on, you'll have to go read his testimony, but he walks in to interview Oswald, and in that room, he picks up the wallet and starts talking about these things, which to me sounds, again, very, very strange, but maybe he was handcuffed and he couldn't get to all of this stuff, and they just wanted to ask him questions about it. What struck me as the most strange of all things in this list of items is that Clements now has the actual stuff. On the 22nd, he has the contents themselves of the wallet. The problem is the very key incriminating piece of evidence that Oswald is Heidel is on a photo of the Selective Service card with a photo of Oswald. Read the other ones: local board, certificate of service, a card, U.S. Forces Japanese identification card, Dallas Public Library card, card of fair play for Cuba. These are all the real things. Certificate of service in armed forces again. The only thing that's not real in the contents of Oswald's wallet is the one key incriminating piece of identification that is obviously altered, created, or manufactured so that, quote unquote, Oswald can use James Heidel's name, which, by the way, he never did, except for supposedly on the rifle. Any of you find that a little strange, that a man in his wallet would carry around a photograph of a card as opposed to the card itself? Now, it gets a little stranger because a couple days later, the FBI has provided photographs of the wallet contents by Fritz. And Bookout writes this all down. Yet, when you compare the two lists, some things are not in the first list that are now in this list, and some things are not in this list that were in the first list. Most importantly being over on the right under the number 2, where it says not in 1990. This is a second certificate of service for the Marines in the name of Alec James Heidel. Didn't exist as evidence on the 22nd. Now it does. This is the FBI. This is the ID I'm talking about. It's obvious that there are erasures and changes in the Alec James Heidel above, and it's obvious that that's Oswald's photo. The rest of it, Clemens felt, if you read it, it's a wonderful testimony to read. Clemens' testimony, it's just, he knows he's got this card, but would not answer a question about it, period. He's aware of it, but he just refused to answer questions about it. And that was that. They just dropped it. But I believe the damage was done. You know, the Heidel and Oswald was put together. More importantly here is, this is now the sum total of, this is the sum total now of everything the FBI, Dallas Police Department say that they found in his wallet. The wallet that is not identified specifically at Dallas Police Department, and somehow goes from having 2 pieces of ID to 5 pieces of ID to 8 ID to now he's got 16 pieces of ID in this single wallet, including Social Security cards, selective service cards, Department of Defense cards, Fair Play for Cuba, national ID card, hotel cards, Japanese cards from years gone past, photos, things like that. This is what he's got. Yet, when it comes down to the full lists of what he has in these wallets, Heidel, the 2 Heidel IDs are now added in. We go back over on the right. Remember the wallet with the brown billfold with the Marine group photo? Well, that's the Marine group photo. That's the brown billfold designation, except that photograph is never included in the items with the wallet. That wallet is never included with the items in the wallet. We don't know what wallet they're using, but we do know now all of a sudden 16 pieces of identification are linked to and cemented to a single wallet supposedly found in Irving, because those are the only wallets we have in evidence, Irving wallets. So someone has to address how wallets like the arrest wallet, which we have evidence right here of Paul Bentley removing the suspect's wallet in the car, coming to Dallas, coming to the police department, and handing this identification. He turned his identification over to Lieutenant Baker. Not the wallet. just the ID. Below this is Baker's report, supposedly. And what bothers me about this report is the highlighted sentence. This is a report written by T.L. Baker, who writes, they arrived shortly after Oswald was brought in, and Detective Baker told Captain, oh, that's right, my bad, Captain Fritz, the suspect's name was Lee Oswald. I was under the impression by reading this that it was a third-person report. Detective Baker is not Lieutenant Baker. That's just fine. So no real consequence here, other than the fact that after the wallet in his hand, Bentley gets to the Dallas Police Department, we do not have any idea where it goes. We have no chain of command. We have no listing. Nothing else exists that describes these wallets. For these are the only two wallets we have in all of the Dallas Police Department inventory. Number, what is it? We got number 382, the red one, and 114, again with the Marine Group photo. These two will remain the only two wallets. We don't talk about the $150, $160 that was supposedly found in one of these wallets. That disappears. The money and change in the wallet also, I'm sorry, the money and change on Oswald seems to disappear. So knowing what was in these wallets and how they relate to the evidence that Oswald is Heidel is extremely suspect, since no one wants to admit or show that this wallet was ever even found. And we surmise that once Westbrook brings in a wallet with Heidel and Oswald information on it, and Fritz knows, or at least you think Fritz knows what's going on about the wallet, since his own men have brought in the suspect with a wallet. We get the impression that Fritz realizes at the moment that either he realizes that the plan is going as they had expected, or realizes that there's a plan in place to railroad Oswald. Very hard to tell which one that might be at this point. Very, very hard. The only piece of evidence we were able to find to confirm that a wallet was found at the scene of the Tippit crime is this signed photograph that a handful of the people who were there gave to Robert Barrett, who was the only FBI guy there who was retiring. So you have Kenneth Croy, and up in the corner it says, first on the scene, which he claims to be, and there's a whole nother discussion in Tippit about the fact that Croy and Westbrook were in the alley in a car. And yes, Croy was there very, very, very early, which seems quite a surprise. But he writes he recovered Oswald's wallet there too. Kind of difficult to back out and back away from that kind of declaration that a wallet was at this scene, but once it reaches Dallas Police Department, it disappears. So I assessed some conclusions related to the wallet and the fact that Croy and Westbrook were the most aware of a need to combine Oswald and Heidel identification to close the loop related to the rifle. So the Tippit and arrest wallets are confirmed. They have been seen. They have been identified, as I just showed you. In one's a phone call, one photograph. The other one is a testimony. They may both have been in Fritz's presence at some point, which might have caused him all kinds of problems, or had been part of the plan. Bring me the wallets. People saw it out there. They're going to remember it's a wallet. Let me take all this ID that incriminates him out of here, get rid of these wallets, and now we have a great case. Besides, he's going to be dead soon anyway. As of the interrogations on the 23rd, at least according to the 2 FBI reports, there was only the one Heidel ID. One has to ask the question, how does this extra identification, the one on the bottom, make its way into the contents of the wallet between the time it's been inventoried not there to when it is inventoried there? Who adds that to the list? Does it add or change anything to the list? It's just added extra, I don't know, piling on evidence, maybe? Not like the Dallas police ever did any of that. So, after Oswald's killed, other than Fritz, Westbrook, Barrett, and Croy, not many people would be aware of multiple wallets. And with no Oswald around, all the wallet contents become associated with the one of the 5 wallets we mentioned. Oswald is never really officially asked about his role in the Tippit murder, which is really quite strange given the circumstances and the timing and why he was arrested. We feel, based on the evidence that we have seen and how it fits together, that Westwood, Croy, and Fritz were heavily involved in the framing and the death of Lee Harvey Oswald by bringing Ruby free and clear to shoot the man, as opposed to serendipitously showing up when the man just happened to be brought out. I go to Fritz again because I wanted you to see, this is an afterword. This one right here is what most people see, the one on the right. If you go to your files and you go to most locations, this is a report, a piece of a report from Fritz to Curry as to what happened. I have always found multiple versions of the same quote unquote permanent record. For example, we did a lot of this in New York City with the school information. Permanent records are not supposed to change drastically unless you're adding to them or completely rewriting them. And even if you completely rewrite them, there's a chronology to things. I want you to see, I did some looking and was able to find this version of that same report. And now at the bottom, we have 2 cases pending. Fritz, 2/22/63. Fritz again, 11/24. Must be 63, I would assume. But we show a closed case. Now, we also have a count to murder or assault to murder offense, and they give you an offense. I ask, how is it possible to have this stamp, the deceased stamp, on 11/24 on the middle one and not on the original on the left? And I don't understand how you can lose that stamp on what is purported to be the original with the rest of them are copies. Why would you stamp a copy and file that? And why was neither one of these updated with the information from down here, where Fritz is back and forth with magistrate, making charges and closing cases? So that was just one of the strange anomalies that I found. And I'm hoping you'll give me the leeway to jump off the deep end for a second. You guys good with that?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna leave you with this one. Number of you, maybe you all have heard about this. In the filming and the photographs of the assassination of Oswald, a microphone appears and disappears, or at least it seems to. Have any of you heard this?
No.
I want to show you two photographs that are taken less than a split second apart. You see Oswald, you see Ruby shoving the gun into his stomach just a second before pulling the trigger on the bottom left. At the top right of that inset is a microphone that hangs down past the door on the left. Another angle of the same exact scene, not a split second later, and that microphone is gone. Now, I've heard explanations in that they had to redo this scene. I can't really buy that, of course. I haven't seen anything more than just the supposition, but just looking at these two superimposed images, one has to wonder what the heck is going on. Because it's not about angles, in that microphone and shadow are hanging. I mean, the shadows on the wall behind the microphone match the shadow on the wall behind the above picture of the man against the wall. The light source is the same. The microphone hangs down below the top of the opening of the door that arrow is pointing to. There is something wrong here, and I've yet to be able to figure out exactly what that is or what it means. There might be a very simple explanation, but I'm having a difficult time finding it.
You took the photograph in the lower left. It's a higher elevation, David, as if someone was on step ladders or something.
Yeah, they had a few people on the railing. Some of the press photographers were on the railing.
Well, that's
I do believe
it's not very stable to take a photograph, is it? Unless,
well,
there are pillars there. Maybe they were against the pillars.
there's pillars, there's railings. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure that the big picture on the right is a photograph of a person standing on the ground, whereas the one on the right may be just simply an elevated camera angle frame. I have more versions of this showing the conflict, the fact that it's there and not there in a number of different angles. You could probably Google that stuff. It's on Ed Forum. I've put it up there, and it got some giggles and some explanations like, oh yeah, it's a different angle, or maybe they pulled it down, or nothing really suffices as to, when you dig into it a little bit, there's just no reason for that microphone not to be there, given where Ruby is on the bottom left and where he is on the right. But
So
that's
what are you actually saying here? What are you implying?
what am I implying?
I'm implying the whole scene is staged, are you?
The implication is that this was done twice. Hold on one second. Yes. Sorry about that, family emergency. I'm back. Yeah, the implications I read through, and I had a tough time buying it as well. And that's why I started to do a little investigation into it, was that there were problems in the filming and presentation of it the first time, and they went back and did it again. Now, I don't buy that. There must be a better explanation. I wanted to put it in here because it represents to me some of the weird anomalies that just continue to pop up and have little to no explanation that we can.
Have you seen, if you go back and look at the footage of the the murder. Have you seen the police officer behind when there's the big sort of scrum down when they're all trying to get Ruby? Have you seen the guy behind where Oswald would have been before he fell? Have you seen footage that suggests that this guy puts a sack over Ruby's head?
I've heard the story, because that it was, that it might have been someone else.
Well, only in the sense that we only see. I mean, I don't really want to get into this. Well, was it Ruby that killed Oswald or not? You know, the whole Ralph Sinclair thing and blah blah blah.
Yeah, no, I can't go down that rabbit hole either.
But you know, when you look at this footage, I'll send you the video. It's from a researcher who's an absolute mixed bag, quite frankly, and I don't want to discuss it openly whilst we're recording. But you know, the implication is that you know that they cover this guy up. I mean, we never see Ruby's face, of course. Really, we see that profile picture that you pointed out where he's standing next to Croy. But there's that dark shadow over his face.
I'm actually watching it right now there, Neil. I wanted to see what you were talking about, and I pulled it up on my computer screen for my iMac is a 43-inch TV, so it's kind of nice.
So it's a split second. There's a guy.
Okay.
There's a guy to the right of where Oswald was when he fell. I think he's got glasses. I think he may.
I see what you're talking about.
And it looks like for a very brief moment that he's just put a sack or a hood over Ruby's head.
I see what you're saying.
And obviously the implication there is that it isn't Ruby, and then it's all done because you never see him come up from the scrimmage, do you?
Well, I do. No, I found a frame there. He's bringing. I can see his face and I can see his head. His hat has already fallen off. I love being able to change this to 0.25 speed. And yeah, you are 100% right. There's a man standing right. Oh man. Okay, it is at. Oh Lordy.
So I mean, it just poses the question: why would anybody have a sack? Why would any detective or whoever have a sack? I mean, just
at that moment to do that with him.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Just, I mean, it's just while you're going a little bit off piece here, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, that's one of those things here. I've seen this scene hundreds of times and never saw that little piece, and now just did. I saw it go from no sack to sack. So either they're, I can't imagine them trying to protect him, other than them, as you say, trying to hide the identity of this person. But I'll have to do some more digging.
Definitely. The shadow on the inset photo of the microphone is, if you follow the brick lines across from the door, it's the shadow of the microphone is actually about where the man in the sort of pointy topped hat is below the circle on the upper photo.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit lower than where you've drawn your circle.
Well, I knew that, yes, I knew if I had the bigger picture, it'd be a little easier. If you open up a little bit above the bottom left picture, you can see that wall that's at the top of the circle. There's a little cross beam that's over there. That's right above the end of that picture. So my bigger concern was the fact that above the door opening, we should see something. We should also see the microphone below the door opening to the left. I mean, because the angles are not that far off. So that's the bigger question to me, is that the microphone is hanging, the entire piece of metal itself is below the top of the opening of the door, and there is a cable connected to it. None of that appears in the one on the right. So all I can ask for you to do is dig in a little deeper. I mean, it's not hard, you know, even if you just Google my name and microphones on an Oswald murder, I posted a lot of photographs, as many as I can, to try to figure out what's what. I've been told it's the angles of things, but I have a very difficult time believing that going from a higher angle shooting to a lower angle shooting, that you would not see more of the microphone. We should be able to see more of the cord hanging down so that that microphone would be, yeah, as you said, right kind of behind that guy's head. But it doesn't work that way. So I don't know. I just don't know what to say. And I wanted to leave that with you because this, among a number of things, are anomalies within the evidence that I find unexplainable. I just don't know how to get there. And if someone can do so, hey, great. I'd love to learn, love to know how that's possible. So,
just to add, the shooter not being Ruby, the other bit of accusation, again not mentioning names, is the hairline just underneath the trilby. It is purportedly different to Ruby's arrest photograph. And the claim is that the shooter is book out.
Okay. Well, why would he do it?
Well, if he wasn't shot, the whole thing was staged.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, again, I don't come to the conclusion that I think it was staged. All I know is I'm conveying that which was offered as a possible explanation, that it had to be done a certain way and it wasn't done right. There's an abnormal lack of blood seen after the man is shot. I mean, in the few photos and the few videos that I've seen, I see no blood at all. No wetness, no anything. So again, I don't know what to make of the actual killing itself. The focus, obviously, you know, and that would definitely spear me off, you know, springboard me off into looking into it, because I did want to focus today, obviously, on letting people know that the ramp idea has to be, you know, put away already. Kind of like the rifle was not his. Once you put things away and can move on, then you can start trying to, you know, what does Holmes say? Get rid of the impossible and the improbable becomes possible. So get rid of the things that are just not possible and look at what is possible, what could have happened. And the annex and the annex entry, the Croy and Westbrook involvement, the Fritz ready to bring Oswald down and getting out of the way as soon as he got down there. I mean, that man moved out of that way pretty darn quick and didn't seem to care at all after the shots. I mean, shots were fired and he still didn't turn around, and he kept walking away. He didn't go help anybody. He got out of the way. So I'll look more into definitely about some of this. But I'm pretty convinced, and I'm hoping I've been able to convince, or at least open the eyes to some, that not only is the reporting offered the conspiracy, but the evidence that we do have delineates the conspiracy very nicely. I mean, it really puts Dean on the hot seat, and the repercussions of Griffin and the reports that were written, the fact that Westbrook was in charge of all of the detailed reports of what happened down there is also pretty interesting. And that, as you said, I think a question was answered once about Westbrook a while ago. The reality that I understand is that not long after this episode, he was sent to Vietnam and was actually with Morales, our man Westbrook. Have a photograph of Westbrook with Morales with a number of other people in South Vietnam or North Vietnam, of which he was an advisor.
Yeah.
So yeah, a degree or two of separation. I hope I've helped prove some of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic presentation, David, and I mean the amount of work,
appreciate it.
amount of work that you put in for us is just, you know, exceptional. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got a few questions, but can I just open it to the floor first? Is there anybody that would like to contribute?
There's one question I'd like to ask, actually. I think there's, again, this echo what Neil was saying. It's a terrific piece of work you've done on how Ruby got into the text, into the where he got into to shoot Oswald. My question is, was there a plan for him to exit? Was there an escape plan? And if not, why do you think that would be? Because I mean, looking at that photograph you've got on the screen, right up next to him, he's surrounded by police officers. Surely he must have known he was not going to get out of there.
Agree completely. This was definitely well, I wouldn't call it a suicide mission because there is an air of people around him, especially his family, working him up. And I'm going to give a little sideline here in that our man Ruby was taking all kinds of different medications and pills. He was on diet pills, which were uppers. He was taking a variety of medications and was drinking. He was very paranoid, running around quite a lot. I don't think it dawned on him that he would be escaping. I think he was convinced that he would never be charged, that he would never be penalized for killing the president's assassin, and that no, there was no way he was ever going to get out of there. But at the same time, I think what he believed he knew about the people in charge of what really happened would be enough to get him out. And that was just not the case.
That makes sense.
I mean, it would have been interesting if Ruby was a little bit more open and honest about LBJ and what he really thought about these other people, you know, and his little anti-Semitic and Jewish side of things. There's another part of the killing that many people don't talk about that I bring up from time to time only because it's apropos, in that Ruby and Ferry and Shaw and Dean and a handful of others were a very tight-knit homosexual group. And they met quite often at these baths. They did parties together. Oswald was known as being a quote-unquote bottom. These are reports by another homosexual in the Dallas Police Department, an asset, who they repeatedly write has provided very substantial and supported information in the past, so that the recommendation at the end of the report was that we would believe this man. Now, I'm not saying it's one way or the other. All I am saying is that that aspect and the need to prove that he was the man he was and the Jew he was, I believe he was brainwashed a little in the manner of Sirhan. I believe he was really pushed to the point where he had no choice but to go and do this. And then they just found a way to get in that he didn't have to worry about being confronted by anybody. And he really didn't. There was just nobody along the path that he took that would have interfered with him. Hold on one second. I got to grab this phone real quick. Hello? Hello? Okay. Never mind. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah.
I don't think there was an escape route. I just don't think he believed in the long run, kind of like Oswald not believing that he was actually going to ever be charged for the president. And they went back on him. you know, and
I
Ruby,
think also he might have been under the impression that if he had, you know, if it had gone to trial, he would have got a benign sentence. He wouldn't have been, you know, received the death penalty. You know, he might have just served a few years.
well, I think there's things not related to the Kennedy assassination that Oswald was able to ascertain in his time working, trying to infiltrate these different Cuban organizations. And I don't know, Ruby, I mean, Oswald is a very interesting character.
Can I just, David, can I just ask David Percox, who got a couple of questions again.
Yeah.
So the first one, you know, is with respect to the alibi, prearranged or otherwise or whatever. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. Doesn't Ruby doing something earlier, i.e. before Western Union timestamps, this is the 8 to 10 in the morning stuff, contradict his prearranged alibi phone call? Also, by asking about Oswald, he makes it seem that he does not know what will really happen. So could you just tackle that bit first?
Sure. Let me do the second part. When he asks about Oswald, all he's really asking is whether they've brought him down yet. Now,
remind me, who was he asking? The TV crew?
The WBAP cameraman people who were outside. I have to think that even though there is a plan for him to go and do certain things, the more I read about Ruby, at this time, he had been up most of the night. He had been taking quite a lot of medications. And I think there was a lot more going on with Ruby than just some guy walking down, pulling a pistol and shooting somebody. I think he was highly medicated and just simply couldn't wait for the time that he was supposed to do what he was supposed to do. You're right, why would he ruin his alibi by not being home when this needed to happen so he could go ahead and do what he said he did? Well, maybe there were I don't have evidence for these other things, but if they were potentially to bring him down earlier than that, then he had to be around. I don't know that maybe he didn't know that they were waiting for him, that they knew that they were going to wait for him once he started, once he did what he was supposed to do.
I mean, was it a given that I don't recall this, but was it a given that Holmes, you know, was it prearranged that Holmes was going to be there on the Sunday morning?
No.
So that's a variable potentially.
Yes, it wasn't. Yeah, he started the morning out going to church with his wife like he did every Sunday.
Yeah.
But abruptly, somewhere around 9:30, he leaves, arrives, and starts questioning Oswald from 10 o'clock till about 11.
But what I'm suggesting is that, you know, if that wasn't all tied in time-wise,
I would imagine it might have been.
That might be the reason why he was there early and hanging around. You know, I don't know, but
no, it makes good sense. It's just the real question does become then not caring enough about the uncovering of the alibi. I mean, you have a timestamp. It's just, you know, you tell them you have a phone call. The reality of whether he was home at the time. Are they going to make a big deal now that Oswald's dead, that he spoke to these WPAP, you know, television people? If you don't talk to them, that part of the story doesn't come out. So you don't get these tidbits of information about what happened and who asked who and who talked to who until the House Select Committee and an independent investigation. The Warren Commission was just simply not going to look into that. Not that area, not that direction, not that way. So I think we're kind of back to whatever happened there is got to have been some level of communication between he and someone internal in the Dallas Police Department in the knowledge of where Oswald was and was able to initiate the transfer. And the only people who could do that was Fritz and Curry. Curry wasn't around.
Yeah, you had to be senior. You really did. Is there just regarding the Western Union? Do you know what the opening hours were? I mean, on a Sunday morning, is it? Do you think it would have been later opening? I mean, you know, that's another variable, isn't it? If that was going to be
idea.
on a Sunday, if it was going to be used as an excuse, you know, they can't. They have to plan the phone call from the stripper, you know, to and then for him to practically go and execute the wire. Have you looked into that aspect of it at all? Because I mean, it's Sunday morning. I mean, it is odd that this thing is open, isn't it? Or not?
Well, I did a quick search here, and it seems that most of them are open from 8 to 5:30, 8 to 10 p.m. They're all open all day long.
Right.
So, and even some of them are 24 hours.
I find it kind of a bit odd, though, in such a highly religious state. But there you go. You know.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, but you know, that
being
same
highly religious Christian society that
well,
that they would insist.
You go over to Western Union and you sell some money, or you go over to the gun store and pick up some rifles. It's Sunday.
Yeah, but money is God.
All right, fair point, Pete. Also, David Percox had another question, which was regarding the thing you did at the end with the 3 copies of the McDonald arrest form. This was pre computing, printing.
Yes, this is going from right to left. From on the right would have been the original arrest report that was done, as you can see, on the 22nd at 1:40. This is at 1:40 p.m. So Oswald had not yet been arrested.
Yeah, I mean that 1:40. I mean, I've obviously looked at that before. That of course is anomalous to the narrative that we've all been led to believe that it was a 1:50 arrest.
1 and 2, you don't get any idea of who actually wrote this. 3, the information in the middle is not written in the same way as the top and the bottom. Lots of weird things about this, okay? Because at 11:22 at 1:40, killed President John F. Kennedy was not part of the concern. They had not begun to talk about charging with him with that yet. It was all about Tippit. So whoever wrote this, I get the impression it was written later, that it was blank. Okay, and then the original of that would have been this, because if you get rid of the assault to murder offense and you get rid of the signatures at the bottom of Fritz, it's identical.
Yeah.
You also have the addition in the top right corner. You have no identification at the top hand corner of the first one. You have an arrest number in the second one, and now you have the arrest number and it's fully filled out. So again, the progression of things seems kind of strange. Maybe it went from the right to the center to the left, but then this whole deceased stamp not being put on the actual original document seems somewhat of a mistake. So I've just been very, very, very suspect of anything offered in this case in written form, because the FBI tends to be able to make copies of copies of copies and make changes and do things and present as final evidence things that were never the way they were to begin with, sadly.
No, I mean, there's definitely anomalies there. I mean, David's point was that was it the norm really at the time in this sort of pre-digital age to effectively do everything in triplicate, you know, 3 copies and
Yes.
and then only one would be stamped. Was that the protocol?
Well, from my understanding, they were formed with carbons already attached in between them. You generally had a 3-layer form or a 5-layer form with a number of different colors. And that original became the master document.
Yes.
So I understand that there would be other copies that would go out to other places, yet how would you not have the deceased stamp with a signature on a copy version rather than the original? Where all the information, I mean, you don't have any of the signatures of Fritz putting him in or taking him out at all related to the arrest on the middle one. So you have no Fritz information at all, yet you now have the deceased stamp. And on the one on the left, you have all the Fritz evidence and things that he signed and no deceased. I don't see how those are compatible. In the same vein, the New York school record, cumulative records and individual records don't match and add up to each other. They just don't.
Okay, well, I think we've done that one. Are there any? I've got a few more questions. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything? No. Okay. So the wallet at the Barrett Owens wallet. Have you looked into the possibility of it being a genuine wallet? I mean, for example, I've seen research that it may have been Ted Calloway's wallet, because if you recall, he takes the pistol, he jumps in, he forces Scoggins to, drive off and allegedly look for the killer. Yeah. And then he circles back, comes back after X period of time. And, there's a whole bunch of cops there, and it's not inconceivable that they do need to ID Calloway, because obviously all you see is footage, and we don't hear about, this thing until Postie's book comes out, and, Barrett's comments and so forth. But could it have been a genuine another's wallet and nothing to do with nefarious activities from the cops?
Okay, so you're talking, I'm back on this page, and you're talking about this filmed.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Ron Ryland film, top left there.
Yeah, the film grab right here.
Yes.
Right there.
And that's,
so the question becomes,
that's about 140, that footage, if I remember, isn't it?
I believe so. Yes, after they come back to the scene.
Yeah. So because there's all these characters are all over the place. This is the stuff that I'm working on, this geochronology. But as I say, I've read it somewhere, and I don't know which researcher it was who suggested that it could have been Calloway. They drive off for X period of times. He forces Scoggins to do this. He's got the pistol, and allegedly, and then he comes back, and of course, and Larry, and oh God, Pete Mellor would know this, but I think Larry Holmes was involved in this as well, and therefore, you've got all law enforcement at the scene, and they're concerned about who is this guy, and they might ask for ID. So that's the argument vis-a-vis Calloway. My question is there an innocent explanation for this Ron Raylan footage?
Well,
it was Ken Holmes.
That's right. Larry Holmes is a boxer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Ken Holmes.
I think so.
Yeah, Ken Holmes. That's right, Pete. Yeah, Ken Holmes.
I have Barrett. Is it Barnett? I'm trying to remember the man's name.
So Ken Holmes was a private detective, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Pete Mellor.
It was something to do with our security in some ways. He did in 2003. He drove me to 10th and Patton and all over Dallas. He did tours
That was his son, wasn't it, though?
No, that was Ken.
That was the guy. So he was a private investigator or security guy, wasn't? And he didn't he spot Calloway and Scoggins in the car, in the taxi?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And he thought it was odd. That's from what I recall, he thought it was odd. And they drove back to the 10th and Patton area. And that's the argument that this Ron Rayland footage might have been the police naturally, concerned with this guy with a pistol in a taxi. Well, who are you? That I believe is the argument. But so that's specifically with respect to Ted Calloway. But my question to David is: could there be an innocent explanation? Because we don't. I mean, if this idea of a killer throwing away, leaving his wallet at a scene of a crime is ludicrous.
Yeah.
And therefore we naturally focus on this being a throwdown wallet and part of the framing, and obviously because it came out of Hostie's book and so forth. But I'm just querying whether there might be an innocent explanation to this particular thing.
I think we tried a few innocent explanations, and I think it all came back down to the testimony of Barrett, or his report, and his subsequent discussions. I was trying to find some testimony here or something in my records, and for some reason I can't seem to find anything on Barrett, which is kind of strange. It's not book out, it's Special Agent Robert M. Barrett. He specifically says at the scene, he was asked by the police officer, whether it was Croy, Westbrook, or Owens, not Owens, someone else. Do you know the name Lee Harvey Oswald? He said no. Do you know the name Alex J. Heidel? While they're pointing to the wallet, he says no, I don't know him either. Okay, and that's kind of the end of that.
And that was his HSCA testimony, or what testimony was that?
That's what I'm trying to nail here. Is why I can't.
Because the wallet didn't appear on the scene, or the knowledge of the wallet publicly didn't appear until Hostie's mid-90s book, after Westbrook had died.
Okay, and what did he say in that book?
I haven't read it, unfortunately, so I can't tell you.
Only because Croy admits that a wallet was found. Westbrook also talks about finding a wallet at the Tippett scene. Hill sees it. There's a lot of people at the Tippett scene who are aware that people are looking at this wallet. Do they know whose it is? Are they overhearing what people say? I don't know. Did it not say Heidel and Oswald, and that he's just saying words aloud to do? Again,
he could be if Barrett's in on it as well.
And my problem I'm having is when I go looking, when I go looking for Barrett, I'm not getting anything of any kind of significance. It's FBI Special Agent, not Robert, Jack Barrett was his name?
It's Robert M. Barrett.
Yeah, Robert M. Barrett.
I mean, we know it's not Tippett's wallet, don't we? Because that was,
yes, it's not Tippett's.
Because he was taken to Methodist, and it was part of his belongings, wasn't it? If I remember.
Correct.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Is there I know you and John have looked into this significantly, but I'm just wondering if there might have been an innocent explanation for it.
All right, so there is hearings. Wait a minute. I was looking at the darn things. I was trying to find the testimony, and I thought I had the testimony. And I thought I had it all right here in, maybe I'm spelling it right. There it is, Barnett.
Barnett?
No, that's never.
That's Eugene Barnett.
Yeah, that's Eugene. That's not.
Who was at Elm and Houston, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. He's FBI. Okay, so where the hell's the FBI? There we go. Baker, Bellew, Austin. How strange, man. I mean, I've had these reports in my possession for a long time. And I know it was Barrett who saw the information, said something about the information, and saw that those two names were there. At least that's what he claims. He's the one, actually, Barrett, who says that the wallet in the arrest vehicle could not have happened. And he says so because the wallet was where he was at Tippett. So he couldn't have still had his wallet with him. So he already argues with the fact that a wallet was found by Bentley in the car because he's so sure that it was an Oswald Heidel wallet at the Tippett scene. Now, the reality still comes is that there is a single piece of identification with Ozzy's photo and Heidel's name in evidence. And it's in evidence for one and only one reason: to connect the rifle to the man.
Oh yeah. No, that's fine. All right. Just moving on.
Yeah, and I think I've taken enough time to prove that the rifle and the man were never together. So
no, I know, and you've done a lot of work with that.
Yeah.
On that before, and the thing you did when that conference I attended in 19.
Oh yeah, 19.
Was great stuff.
Thank you.
What about? I've always wondered this appearance out of nowhere of Fritz's notes to the ARRB. What's your take on all of that?
There are people who have written their reports and they were asked, Holmes, Kelly, Hosty, Bookout, people who were in the room and not Dallas Police Department officers below Fritz, but peers from other areas who claim that Fritz was taking notes. Okay, that he did write very soon after. It was about 11 pages of notes that he wrote out about the interrogation. And there are numerous generations of these notes. And the biggest problem in those notes, as most people are aware, is the fact that according to the originals, he is asking Oswald about backyard photographs prior to Stovall and Rose returning with them. And I believe I already have seen where in the notes, I have these notes, that he crosses out that this thing happened at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which was 2.5 hours before they showed up. And he changed the time of this interrogation to 6 p.m. So now showing them the photographs was no longer a conflict or a problem because Rose and Stovall have come back. Again, the problem with Rose and Stovall's inventory of what they took from Beckley and from Irving with these photographs doesn't include those photographs or negatives. When asked about why don't these most important negatives and photographs that convict Oswald show up on the inventory in which you were ridiculously detailed on a whole bunch of other useless minutia, Stovall or Rose's answer was, well, it's part of miscellaneous photos and papers. The most important photograph there is, and they don't identify it separate from, I mean, taking a weekend just to look at the inventory evidence can turn into a 5-year project. The evidence and how they changed it, the 250 pieces of evidence that went to to DC, and the over 500 pieces of evidence that came back, all focused on incriminating Oswald or being completely useless. is where you'll find a lot of the incriminating change from one side to the other. It's a very difficult, it's very difficult, disappointing. I mean, because literally FBI took 200 and some odd, 250 pieces of evidence Friday night with Vincent Drain and the group, didn't tell anybody, came back on the 26th to take photographs of this same stuff. But when they took photographs of it, as I say, their numbering ends at 455. After number 455, you find that some of the items that they didn't give numbers to are: one, the Briar Loom shirt that they found in the bottom drawer of his cabinet, which he had worn to work that day and changed before he went to the theater, and the gray slacks that he wore to work that day and changed out of before he went to the theater. So we go back to arguments that I have with many, many, many people. Anybody who describes Oswald wearing ripped elbows, torn shirt as he's leaving the Texas School Book Depository, because they don't see him very often. And I'm talking specifically about Bledsoe here on the bus. Bledsoe is describing the arrest shirt an hour and a half before he even puts it on.
Yeah,
Doesn't work.
well,
doesn't
Bledsoe, to be fair, Bledsoe is all over the place. If you read her testimony, it's an absolute nightmare.
It is a nightmare.
She had to be chaperoned, if that's the right word, through it. There was a female counsel, wasn't it? Who I can't remember her name, who had to assist her in getting through her testimony.
Are you thinking of Markham or are you thinking of Bledsoe?
No, Bledsoe.
Okay, because the same thing, Markham was.
I mean, we know Markham's a nightmare as well, but no,
right.
Specifically Bledsoe, because I obviously wanted to look into the bus ride thing.
Yeah, I'm not a believer that he was on that bus. So, and if you read McWaters and look, do a little research, do a little search for McWaters, within a week of his testimony, he goes back to the Warren Commission and recants everything he says, saying he can't live this way. The man that I told you was Oswald was not. Oswald was not on my bus. It was a man named Roy Milton Jr. And
was it Milton Jones? Milton Jones.
Roy Milton Jones Jr.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, his testimony is weird as well.
Yes, yes. So,
well, I mean the whole bus. Well, but you are a Harvey and Lee fan, aren't you? So you do believe
I'm Harvey and Lee to certain points.
Okay, because the conclusion there isn't it that one of them did take the bus and the other one got the Rambler, isn't it?
That's I think that's the Harvey and Lee line. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm a little at odds with John about that, because I've read enough to see that I mean, with McWaters recanting, which would be a real strange thing to allow a man to do, to let the man that you want to accuse off the hook. But that's what they let him do. They let him say what he said. And just like I did with Mexico, John was under the impression that it was Lee who went to Mexico and Harvey was doing the ODO stuff and the Dallas stuff. And while I initially started out my Mexico work with some of that under my mind, as I went further and further in, I found that accepting any person being on this trip took a lot of faith. So in the Harvey and Lee narrative, Lee going to Mexico makes sense. It works in the ongoing story. But when you look into the rest of the evidence, you realize that a taller, thicker, dumber Oswald would never have been described like he was described by the people who were there. Duran said the man was barely taller than she was, and she was 5'3". Okay. The Lee Oswald part of this group wasn't the argumentative political asylum guy. He was the follow orders, do what you're told, muscle guy. He was an aircraft mechanic, not a radar operator. Okay, there's just a big difference in intelligence between Harvey and Lee. So I'm not one that, I think Lee was used certain ways and then either disappeared, was killed. Not really sure what they did with him, to be honest. Could have been sent to Siberia for all I know. But there's just simply too much other evidence that cannot be denied that firmly suggests that two people, whether it's Harvey and Lee or Lee and Harvey or so, two people did lead lives of Lee Harvey Oswald, which were ultimately combined into one biography for the Warren Commission.
Yeah. Well,
the details, the who, the what.
we could. I mean, we have done Harvey and Lee with other presenters before.
Any negative?
No, it wasn't negative. I mean, I think a lot of us are open-minded, but the problem is really going the full hog here and thinking, accepting the concept that this happened at a very young age. That's the most typical thing. I mean, Malcolm Blunt, I don't want to speak for Malcolm. He worked with John as well, as you know.
Sure.
But he just couldn't, a lot of John, I think everybody recognizes that John's research is fantastic. It's just, can you go the full hog and conclude that this whole thing, this whole spycraft thing started at such an early age, when things could go wrong,
I don't know.
Particularly with the way children grow up, through puberty. I mean, the differences can be enormous. And why would you? I mean, is there not a better way of sending in a Russian-speaking Marine into the Soviet Union? Do we have to go through this whole malarkey?
Mm-hmm. See, now I try to stay away from questions like that because, yeah, they probably could have done different things and probably did. Given what information we have now and the evidence available, there are some very, very strange coincidences. For example, Ed Pick marrying Veda, not Veda. Ed Pick's wife comes from a Hungarian family that settled into the Hungarian area of New York City. There is strong indication that Harvey was Hungarian and taught Russian and was somehow involved. I'm going to add another weirdness to you, is that Ekdahl, Albert Ekdahl, who ultimately married for a little while or tried to marry Marguerite, was involved with the organization that helped bring Hungarian refugee children out of Hungary and into the United States. So the 3 degrees of separation seem to get narrower and narrower and narrower. It makes sense to create dual type personas and to do as much as possible to maintain that crossover. But when you get and look at it, they aren't the same. They don't look the same. They don't behave the same. They're nowhere near the same height, the same weight, the same disposition. None of these things are true. Okay, so how do you take these two different people? Both have been now called Lee Harvey or Harvey Lee Oswald, and create after the fact. I mean, some of the stuff has to happen as it's going, but some of it has to happen after the fact. I mean, you look at his New York City school records and what they give you as permanent New York City school records, and they are a joke. I mean, there's no way an administrator of education would ever have allowed this kind of document to exist to represent a child's time at school for a number of reasons. Most of it being the number of days that they involve drastically exceeds the amount of time he spent at school. So when you do an analysis of this, which again I have done, the number of days that a person has to be somewhere and not go. oh man, it's like, they don't even mention the time he's at youth house. And who is at youth house? Is that Lee or is that Harvey? Most people understand it to be Harvey. It gets very, 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 very deep. I I wish I had better answers for you. I am convinced in some areas that there is definite evidence that two people sharing that name existed.
Yeah, I mean, this is again.
Okay, but the step further is that took these two people, and again, 1959's the Lee passport photo, short hair. He's in a suit. That's the last photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald we have.
Mm.
If you notice pictures after that photograph, none of them look like that anymore. It looks like Harvey in Russia. So that photograph, that that was the photograph taken for his Los Angeles passport to drive and train on over to take the boat and to go to Europe.
Mm.
I don't know if you're aware of
David, I'm not. I mean, I'm not dissing this theory at all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
I mean, I think, and a lot of us are quite open-minded to the thing. It's this final step that I think some people have trouble with. One thing I would ask you to do, if you haven't already, James Norwood, who you must know, and as
he sends me stuff a lot.
He's a disciple. He actually did a pretty good presentation for us last May, and it's on our DPUK website.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know. I don't think it's on our YouTube channel because we didn't have that then. But anyway, it's worth looking into that if you haven't seen his.
He does a Harvey and Lee.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it is interesting. Just a couple of other things I wanted to say was that I mean, Vaughan till his deathbed maintained that Ruby never came past him on the main street ramp. You know, and I know you touched on that, and he has been a bit of a scapegoat, hasn't he? This guy.
Yeah, and he's scapegoated by Dean, and Dean, you know, being his sergeant, just threw him under the bus. Yeah, which was really quite sad. And you're right, he did forever say it, and it never did happen that way. And I don't know that they cared very much about how much collateral damage. I mean, if you ask somebody like Ralph Yates, I'm sure collateral damage was not something that they considered. That they relished. Seemed like they relished.
But there was the whole mental thing with him, wasn't there? Yates.
Oh yeah, no, he was the man that supposedly dropped a man off carrying a package that he was asking him about shooting a man from the roof, and did he know Ruby, and did he know the carousel room? And he told this story to his air conditioner buddy, and then all of a sudden the FBI came in and he was put in an institution for 11 years.
Terrible.
He died in the institution.
Yeah. There were some people think it was Larry Crayford that he picked.
Yeah,
up.
no, they're just like Abraham Bolden.
Yeah. So I have to finish. I mean,
okay.
There are no more questions, so I'm going to have to finish on one big final question, and it's about who are the bent officers in the Dallas Police Department, because you know, there potentially are a tremendous amount of bad actors. There's also a tremendous amount of potential negligence.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of go along to get along.
Yeah, and then there's we've got to save our pensions, and this is the party line. We need to toe it. So, you know, I mean, some people could be left with the impression that every officer was corrupt, and there were tens and tens of them ex ante that were involved in this. My personal view is that there were a lot of them covering up for whatever reasons, you know, as you say, financial reasons, promotion reasons, and also possibly because they were just ashamed of of what had happened in their, on their watch. But going back to the usual suspects, I mean, we've got Croy. I mean, Croy's activities on that day are quite, I mean, obviously you've highlighted his involvement in the wallet, and you've highlighted his involvement in the basement, but his activities on that day are very, very suspect.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of he pulling over at Houston and Maine, I think it was, he was on, pulling up by the sheriff's office, or speaking to some law enforcement people, and saying, what's going on? Do you need my help? I'm a reserve officer. No, go ahead, we're fine. This is the most insane event. And no, you go ahead, go and have lunch with your wife at Austin's barbecue. I mean, that whole thing.
Yeah, it's just Kennedy.
It is crazy. So, I can certainly buy into Croy being, ex ante involved in this. Westbrook, obviously, you've made a great case. I mean, this is quite remarkable. I think if you look into Westbrook, I mean, for example, you talked about Dean not being able to answer a simple question about the door.
Mm-hmm.
Westbrook couldn't answer a question about who discovered the jacket behind the Texaco station. So
exactly,
I mean, and apart from everything else we've got on him, clearly Fritz is he's involved. I mean, I don't know whether he had to be involved suddenly or whether he was ex ante involved, but clearly you made a good case. Sergeant Hill, I mean, you didn't mention him, but there is so much stuff against him as well. And you mentioned the officers in the Carousel Club. I mean, he was one of the leading, regular guests of the club. And Dean, obviously, you mentioned, but you didn't touch on Roscoe White, which I've become a bit of a fan of as the Knowles shooter.
Mm-hmm.
What's your perspective on White? I don't know if you remember that Beverly Oliver said that she saw Dean and White when she ran across the grassy knoll, both of whom were supposed to be off that day.
And she knew them both.
Well, she says she knew them both. I mean, we could get into the whole Beverly thing, but
another story.
That is another rabbit hole. But I'm just saying that she claims to have seen both Roscoe White, I think without his wig, I think she said, and Sergeant Dean, both who were had leave that day on the grassy knoll.
I'd love to see if anyone can point them out. I'd take a look through, knowing now that I focus on that a little bit. My feelings about White had to do with when he joined and what his specialties were.
Yeah.
He was photographic.
Exactly. And
okay.
And then we go to the backyard photos, of course.
Well, backyard photos, more importantly to me, you start, while initially I thought maybe it was Oswald who created these Heidel identifications for some purpose. A lot of people think he was supposed to do that at Dodd's request to help catch Kleins and that kind of stuff. Part of me believes that the White was instrumental in the backyard photo and that incrimination because of the timing. It also the fact that there's an extra photograph. See, what gets me about this is that the Roscoe White pose that was found in 1975, 76 is exactly the same pose that they put Detective Brown into when they took the photograph on November 29th, just a few days later. Now, exactly. So you have two photographs in which you have two specific poses. You lose a negative. So basically one negative attributes now for these two photos, and a third photo shows up down the road in a pose that if there were only 2 photos taken, nobody would have seen in 1963. So either the photos were taken and those poses were available, a cutout was made, and the cutout that was made exactly follows the lines of Oswald of the 3rd photo. The problem, though, and I've done this at Ed Forum as well, is that if you look carefully at the backyard photos and some of the ghost photos and some of the secondary photos, there are 2 parallel white lines that are on an angle that run from the top to the bottom of the photograph. And if you take the person standing in the Roscoe White pose and put them into the cutout, it fits fine, but the fence in the back is tilted at 35 degrees. So I can't find it any other possibility that it wasn't Roscoe who created the backyard photos. I just can't.
Yeah, no, look, Gary Shaw's done a lot of, as you obviously know, work on White. Gary Fannin, who presented to us a few months ago, he's done work on it as well. And
Yeah,
I just, and I mean, it's always very difficult to go down the identity of the shooter's route. But,
oh yeah, yeah. Let's ID the shooter first.
oh God, I mean, one of our members on the call still, David Percox, has looked into this. It's, you know, it's really difficult, but I'm actually inclined to think that Roscoe White is involved and that story is legitimate.
In the shooting?
Yeah, and I think his death is a mystery. And there's just, you know, he knew Oswald. I mean, he traveled to, you know, the Far East with Oswald. He was in Asugi. The stuff that was found in the foot locker, the telegrams, you know, I am Mandarin. You know, I can buy into all of that stuff. You know, and he's, you know, it's kind of serendipitous that he got the job at the DPD around the time that Oswald got the job at the TSBD. You know, and
the same time Hill was moved over to work under Westbrook.
Yeah, I mean, this, to me, I feel that he could be, you know, he could be involved in this, and I think there's a reasonable case. I don't want to touch on Beverly Oliver too much, but there are quite a few people I know, Americans, you know, who genuinely believe in her story as well. I know there are potential holes in it, but you know, so I think that might be the case. I mean, Harry Olsen, we haven't mentioned his role in this. I mean, I touched on it with, you know, the Kathy Kay, Jack Ruby, you know, several hours discussion. I think Olsen has got some. I mean, he's, you know, if you look into his testimony, the fact that Curry sacked him, you know, within months of the assassination, his flight to California and so forth. I'm pretty sure Olsen is involved in this.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, as you start to expand out into the JFK assassination as a whole, then yeah, your list starts to get, you know, hairy, and there's just so much of it online, and everything's all over. I had hoped, and I think I accomplished that we've pretty much put to rest that Ruby did not come down the ramp. Ruby went into the side annex door, was helped by Croy, was probably spotted by Westbrook, and he was the one, or someone else for Westbrook spotted and got the word to Westbrook so that Westbrook could easily walk over, bang on the door, say a high five, or, you know, whatever, a look, whatever it is that got the situation stopped and moved down. And that's the impetus for how Oswald magically appeared within a second or two, or rather a minute or two, of when Ruby was down there. It wasn't the other way around. So once you look at it from that way, and it makes a lot more sense given who they could control and who they had to watch. The weirdness, as you've said, though, is his activities that morning could really betray him. And
well, they could, as David pointed out, could betray him, and also are inconsistent with the planned alibi narrative as well. You know.
Well, I think what happens, though, again, with him being a little drugged and it being 1963 and everybody believes the police and the FBI, that he was able to get away with a lot more then than now that we're able to look at it in a different way and look backward at it. Is all I'm really saying. I don't think people were as aware of these things. That's all. I mean, the fact that he was wandering around, the fact that he got a phone call. I mean, these are very, very good details that take the official story and derail it, which is why you don't hear them, which is why they're not part of the abridged, simple narrative. Because anyone with a brain can start seeing that, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of problems with Ruby claiming what he did. It doesn't work that way. I wanted to go back to Roscoe one quick second. You guys have the Roscoe Navy communications that he was supposedly sent?
Yeah, so if you buy Gary Fannin's book, it's in there. And if you contact Gary Shaw, I'm sure he'll send them to you.
Oh no, I have them. I have the originals. Yeah, I have the originals. I have photographs of the originals from the archives.
Okay. I thought you were looking for them. Okay, so
no, I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of them and whether you had any thoughts about them.
If you read them, they look really genuine, in my view. But
they feel that way. But then again, if you're good at what you're doing, they should.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look. We also know that there were some issues around the whole Roscoe White reveal.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, and we don't have to go into all of that as well within the early 90s, and the possibility that Geneva, you know, she masqueraded the diary that the FBI took. So I mean, not masqueraded. She created a false diary because they took it. But no, it's great stuff. Well,
I'm glad I could help. I mean, there's so many more things to talk about, of course.
Oh, there are. I could be on the phone for hours with you. Just to wrap it up, though, what are you working on next? What are you doing now?
Well, recently we were trying to wrap up this information. The last couple of months has been about the wallet and trying to really nail down when Heidel information came into being and where it came from, where the wallets went, who knew what when. And one of John's very good points is that, you know, if Fritz knows most anything about what's going on and is all of a sudden given this Tippett scene wallet with this incriminating stuff, he feels, and I have to kind of agree with him, that Fritz kind of figured right away that this was a drop-down wallet to incriminate his boy. I mean, he had been doing it for years and years and years and years with other means and other ways to make sure that his convictions were very, very high. He made sure whatever evidence was necessary was available. So I don't see it that hard to put past. So we spent a lot of time nailing down, and the people you named, Fritz, Westbrook, Croy, if they were and now you're talking about, and then Shelley, potentially a little bit of Shelley on the Texas School Book Depository side, because he really was a mysterious person in there. I think with those 3 or 4 people, a lot of what happens in the Dallas Police Department afterward is, again, to go along, to get along, to support your guy, because you're not going to cross Fritz, you're not going to cross Decker, you're not going to cross Curry. You know, you're a lieutenant, you're an officer, whoever you are, you want a career in the Dallas Police Department, you're going to support what's being said. And you're going to be.
The trouble is, David, is that the more we look into this, there's potential for a tremendous amount of people involved in this ex ante. You know, from the strategic planning right through to the execution, before you even get to the cover up thing. I mean, it is
All right,
potential.
well, I don't know if, do you buy into the, I'm sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
No, you carry on. You carry on.
Yeah, no, do you buy into the idea that there's a hierarchy of sponsor, facilitator, and mechanic related to this program?
In plain English,
Plain English,
What do you mean?
sponsor being the level above government,
the sponsor being Hunt or
Hunt,
yeah.
outside or above the government, or LeMay,
Yeah, I
or
think
whoever
of
might
course,
be,
of course that's possible.
who could push the buttons. Then you have facilitators like the David Atlee Phillips and E. Howard Hunt and the Barnes and the Morales.
Angleton and yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, and then you have the mechanics who are out there actually doing the stuff with the weapons, with the ear stuff, they're doing it. And they're doing it based on the facilitators providing them assurances that they will not be caught and not be, because we have a patsy in mind and someone who will be taken care of. And the sponsors involved with this have guaranteed the facilitators that the mechanics will be fine. And so the mechanics are really carrying out orders. The facility, I think one of the key people that we don't talk too much about between facilitator and sponsor is a guy named McBundy George, or George McBundy. I believe he was the conduit between the two, or one of the conduits between the two. I honestly believe Bundy began to agree with the people around him that Kennedy was selling the United States to the Russians and giving up too much. And I think he bought that hook, line, and sinker. He changed the NSAM's 268 to 278 before he even was killed. Yeah, which is mind-boggling in itself. And everything else changed after that. So
yeah, I also can't. I do get sucked in by the whole, you know, the Murchison Ranch thing, the eve of the assassination.
That I don't believe happened. I'm sorry.
Oh, you don't believe? So you believe? So you think all the witnesses?
The Murchison thing? Well, I know Nixon wasn't there. We know Nixon.
No, Nixon wasn't there because he'd flown back. But
and I don't believe Hoover was there. I have a tough time believing Hoover was there.
But the you know, the domestic staff that witnessed this, and Madeleine Brown. You don't believe the Madeleine Brown story, then?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Yeah, I have it. Yeah, I'm not. These are one-level people telling the story that happens. Whether she was mad at him or not, whether, you know, there's all kinds of extemporaneous things that could go into why someone would say something about these people. Do I believe that a Murchison would fund something like this or be in? Maybe. I mean, again, maybe. As much as rich is rich, you don't compete with the CIA and the military. I don't care how rich.
Yeah, but you could work with them.
But you could work with them, yes.
To work with them. This is where we get into the realms of a Venn diagram,
right?
You know, where actually it isn't. I know you've discounted the mafia as ex ante, although obviously we think that they could be involved in the execution.
Yeah, no, I believe facilitate. Rather, mechanic is definitely possible.
Yeah, but I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, I mean, just this concept that it isn't just the military-industrial complex, or it's not the oil barons, or it's not just LBJ, or it's not the pro-Castro or anti-Castro. You know what I'm saying? That actually there's this kind of mixture of entities that are, you know.
Yeah, I find it a little bit more that people tend to do things for people that they fear, care about, love, respect. I don't know that level of person cares what they're doing.
Yeah,
I think they're doing it under orders and under a plan from people like the sponsor level people, like the chief of staffs, like the McGeorge, just being reassured. And then the whole role of the facilitator, that whole CIA executional level that was so successful from 1953 to 1963 around the world, killing people, got pretty, they were pretty much of themselves,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
I thought I really felt as if they were untouchable at some point. And that's why I believe the JFK assassination winds up being so barbarically in your face, that by mistake, this group of people raised their ugly heads above the waterline and were seen,
Yeah.
and were recorded and were realized. And since then, things have gone the way things have gone. When I say things have gone, to me, since 1963, the rich and government has way more power now than they did then.
Yeah.
Way more influence, way more power. And I think that is a direct result of the attitudes that removed JFK and ultimately RFK from being president. That's what they wanted.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get involved in this because we'll never get off the call, but has there been a decent president since JFK? Can we park that question?
No, there has.
You know where I'm coming from there, don't you?
I do know. I know
possibly
exactly.
possibly Carter.
My problem, well, Carter had good intentions.
Yes,
but
that's what I mean. Yeah.
But I think the machine of the politic machine just ground him out and really didn't allow him to get anything and do anything at all. I mean, you look at who helped who, and all of a sudden from Carter to Reagan, Reagan now gets everything under the sun and all the support in the world, whereas Carter, he couldn't do anything without getting yelled at. So,
but don't underestimate the tailwind of a good economy. Right?
No doubt.
Seriously.
That's what Bush took over for.
Sometimes the shit happens prior, and then it works its way out as the economic cycle picks up. And hey ho, you can take all the plaudits for that, and
economic policy generally takes 2.5 years to enact.
There's a time lag, and that's what happens. But anyway, we're getting on to a completely different subject.
Good stuff, though. It's good stuff.
David, we're over 4 hours here.
Okay.
You've really done a fantastic talk for us. Thank you so much. Very detailed, and we'd love you back as well.
Well, once I find another direction that I feel like heading in, I'll let you know, and we can go from there. There's always, I don't know how much y'all have discussed and looked into the rifle situation or the Mexico situation. I've always wanted to get back to the Mexico thing because most people just simply can't believe that he didn't go. And there's a big discussion there to be had. So
some people think he went twice, but that's another story.
Exactly.
All right, look, we must wrap it up there. Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure. Thank you all so very much.
We'll obviously we'll share this, with the public via our channel. As far as our members are concerned, are you happy to give us the PowerPoint, or do you see that as?
Oh, for sure. I'll send this out to you. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. All right. Well, thanks, David. All the best.
You got it. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.